Chapter 397. Therefore, Su Li only wanted to put away the cave after refining 10%, and then she could refine it when she had time. As for Dongfang Wuxue, he could only suffer for a few more years. After all, he had endured for 100 years, and a few more years were not a big deal. Yin Zai woke up with a muffled groan. After rubbing his eyebrows and sitting up, he happened to meet Su Li's clear eyes. Somehow, he felt a chill in his heart. This feeling was somewhat familiar. Before Yin Zai recalled, Su Li suddenly said, "In a few days, I will be able to control the way to open the exit of the cave." Yin Zai was shocked when he heard this, and a sense of joy after surviving a disaster emerged from the bottom of his heart. But before he could get up to thank her, he saw the petite girl tilting her head. "But I don't want to let you out. What should I do?" Yin Zai's pupils constricted, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, and he completely calmed down. That's right, the female cultivator in front of him, who looked like a young girl, was actually a monster whose strength was even more terrifying than that of a nascent soul cultivator. He was once a proud son of heaven, so he naturally understood the personalities of these monsters. They were all very strange. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Fellow Taoist, I won't tell anyone about what happened in this cave." Ha ha ha. Su Li couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. "Yin Zai, you can't guarantee it? Then what will you do?" Yin Zai's expression turned cold. Even if he was facing a monster, the consequence of going against him was very likely to be death. He had his own pride. Su Li yawned, and a sense of laziness appeared in her eyes. The divine thunder of water in her body was being refined all the time, so she didn't have to deliberately keep sitting cross-legged. "Dongfang Wuxue made a deal with me. You can do it too," she said slowly, and her calm tone fell into Yin Zai's ears, which made him look colder. He said in a deep voice, "Sure enough, Dongfang Wuxue knows your details. You have colluded before." When he thought that Dongfang Wuxue entrusted his hope to him on the surface, but he secretly put all his hope on the girl in front of him, he couldn't help but feel a little suffocated. Yes, he only needed to hold his breath. In terms of strength, he was indeed far inferior to Su Li. He was not qualified to be dissatisfied. Su Li raised her eyebrows and glanced at Snow Child, who had woken up but was still pretending to sleep. She whispered, "Do you also want to know my identity?" "Of course I want to. Which holy sect are you?" Yin Zai said bluntly. He was indeed curious. If this woman was willing to reveal her identity, it would be for the best. However, when he saw Su Li smile, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "Let me tell you, I can. However, you have to promise me something." Su Li's lips curved beautifully, and the dagger was revealed. Yin Zai thought to himself, "Sure enough," and asked openly, "What conditions?" Su Li narrowed her eyes and said softly, "Follow me and work for me. How about I tell you?" Yin Zai's eyes widened, and he stood up abruptly. Impossible. He was a dignified sky pride. Although he had already betrayed his sect, he would never submit to anyone. "Oh, really?" Su Li's tone was light, but it gave off a sense of pressure out of nowhere. "So, you have to choose between surrender and death?" Yin Zai sneered and said proudly, "Even if I, Yin Zai, die, I will never recognize anyone as my master." "Good." Su Li clapped her hands gently and praised, "You have a good temper. Since you don't want to, then go to hell." As she said, she waved her hand gently. Yin Zai was suddenly stunned. She was so straightforward. Did she want to kill him? "Wait," he cried out in horror, but it was too late. He was directly swept by a palm, and his whole figure disappeared out of thin air. Not even a speck of dust fell. This scene suddenly scared Snow Child to open his eyes, and he even forgot to pretend to be asleep. Su Li clapped her hands with satisfaction. The newly mastered skill was not bad. Since this guy was stubborn, she would let Dongfang Wuxue persuade him. Over the valley, Dongfang Wuxue, who was waiting anxiously, suddenly changed his face slightly. He sensed a wave. Then, before he could react, he saw a black door appear out of thin air, and then a man with a sallow face with a horrified face was thrown out. Brother Yin?" Dongfang Wuxue asked doubtfully. Yin Zai, who was sitting on the ground, suddenly woke up, as if he had woken up from a fake death. His body trembled slightly. Seeing Dongfang Wuxue floating in the air without a physical body, he didn't understand it and muttered to himself, "Am I dead?" Dongfang Wuxue stared at Yin Zai, and his eyes were more strange. He felt that Yin Zai in front of him was a little abnormal. In the blue cave, Suli patted Snowchild's shoulder gently, squatted down and said softly, "Snowchild, I only know that your name is Snowchild. Which sector you from?" A little fear appeared on Snowchild's face, and he immediately told his origin like pouring beans out of a bamboo tube. He didn't want to die yet. Just now, Su Li's means of killing people without a word really scared him. "I am a talent disciple of Holy Snow Sect in the Beihan region. I rank 9th on the Tianjiao list. Snowchild is just a cultivation name. My real name is Lu Yin. I have just practiced for 700 years this year. I sneaked out with Xin Meiji this time. I don't want to die. I will work for you." Su Li didn't respond after hearing it, and only glanced at Xin Meiji, who was still in a coma. At this moment, Snowchild, whose will to survive broke out, immediately told all the identity of Xin Meiji clearly. Although Xin Meiji was not a member of the Holy Sect, she also had the title of Little Holy Girl in the Beihan region. She was the eldest disciple of the smallest sect of Meizong, a high-grade sect. Although she was 700 or 800 years old like Snowchild, her mind was still simple and she had never experienced the bloodshed of the cultivation circle. The two bold people discussed and sneaked out all the way to the Juzhou region where the blood accident of Samsara happened. Relying on the strength of fighting beyond levels, the two also made a living. It was rumored that they were two old monsters of Yuanying realm. Then they were invited by Heaven Rover, and these things happened. "Wu, don't kill me." Xin Meiji woke up and cried loudly. Her nose was bubbling, and she didn't look like a talent disciple comparable to Yuanying realm at all. Su Li rubbed her eyebrows and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She thought that by dealing with Yin Zai in that way, she could frighten the rest and better deal with the aftermath. But she didn't want to directly scare the two juniors to death. Holy Snow Sect and Meizong are troublesome, but I have been in trouble for a long time. I don't feel itchy when there are too many lice. These two little troubles are nothing. With this thought flashing through her mind, Su Li smiled slightly and nodded gently. "Then you two will follow me for the time being." "Thank you, senior." Xin Meiji was overjoyed when she heard the words. She saluted repeatedly and almost shed tears of gratitude. Although Snowchild couldn't speak, Su Li clearly saw the same emotion as Xin Meiji from his grateful eyes. Are the juniors in the cultivation circle so simple now? Su Li couldn't help laughing, shook her head and stopped caring about it. After Old Lady Duhua woke up, Su Li also asked her. Old Lady Duhua agreed directly after thinking for a while. After this trip to the cave, the arrogance in her heart had long dissipated. Now it was not a bad thing to follow an evildoer. As for Dongfang Yi, Su Li didn't mean to ask for his consent at all. Even his father had agreed. This guy couldn't be controlled by him. After instructing everyone to rest, Su Li was completely immersed in refining the divine thunder of water. With concentration, her speed was slightly improved. At the same time, in the valley, Yin Zai and Dongfang Wuxue stared at each other, and there was a deep helplessness in the latter's eyes. "Is what you said true? She really is Su Li, is master?" Yin Zai still used the name in the illusion of reincarnation, and his eyes were full of ecstasy and excitement. "Yes, you have asked for the 88th time," Dongfang Wuxue replied weakly. If Yin Zai asked again, he really didn't want to nod. Yin Zai clenched his fists tightly. The state of mind that he had cultivated for 1,500 years seemed to be cultivated in vain. After hearing the news, he couldn't control himself at all. Master was still alive. There was nothing more shocking than this. Although it was only a short life, his experience in the small Qinghe province was more abundant than all his previous experiences of cultivation. The cultivation of the disciples of big sects was nothing more than boring meditation and practicing spells. Even if they went down the mountain to kill demons and devils, they were still feared by mortals and guarded against by peers. There was no warmth to speak of. In the Qinghe province, he saw too many feelings. His heart had entered the mortal world, and he didn't want to return to the way of forgetting emotions. After stepping into the emotional path, he also found that the so-called evil path was not as terrible as those sanctimonious people who claimed to be righteous in the sect said. On the contrary, it was more emotional. Who was the Buddha and who was the devil? No one could say clearly. He was grateful to Suli from the bottom of his heart for the practice method she gave him at the beginning, which led him to a brighter path. However, such a talent was destroyed by a group of greedy people. How could he feel good in his heart? Therefore, he betrayed the sect. Even if he was condemned by thousands of people, he still stuck to the path in his heart and didn't want to let Suli down. But now, Dongfang Wuxue actually told him that Suli was still alive. Moreover, they just met. Holy girl Su's appearance is quite different from that of the previous life. Her bone age is less than 15 years old. Obviously, she is a reincarnated body and has recovered her memory. Dongfang Wuxue muttered, but Yin Zai suddenly raised his head and waved his hand. Let's go and find Master now. It's my honor to follow Master and work for him. Dongfang Wuxue looked at his empty body and smiled bitterly. How could he go out? Yin Zai was really stimulated too much, and his brain was not working well. Time flew, and 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Buzz! With a tremor of the whole cave, the central area that was originally inlaid in the inner cave began to peel off slowly from the outer cave. It turned into a beautiful and exquisite palace at a speed visible to the naked eye and fell into the hands of Suli, who was standing in the nothingness. Looking at the bottomless black pit, Suli narrowed her eyes slightly and waved her palm to break all the pillars that supported the outer cave. Rumble! Countless floating stone platforms smashed into the pit. After a few breaths, the whole pit was filled, along with more than 100 practitioners who came in to seek opportunities. Chapter 398. In the black stone forest, a dazzling light flashed in the peaceful boulder matrix, which lasted for a few seconds before fading away. After the light returned to the original level, there were 5 more people in the middle of the boulder matrix. They were the survivors who walked out of the cave led by Suli. There should have been 6 people, but Dongfang Yi wanted to accompany Dongfang Wuxue, so Suli followed him. Anyway, with his cultivation, he couldn't help for the time being. Let's leave the black stone forest first. Suli glanced at the deepest part of the black stone forest, and an imperceptible trace of doubt flashed across her eyebrows. Hearing this, everyone nodded and set off immediately. With the map contributed by Yuan's disciple, they didn't get lost. It only took them 2 days to get out of the black stone forest. Outside the faint black fog, they could vaguely see the peripheral mountains of the dangerous black stone land. Suli sensed the mark she secretly sat down before coming and called softly in her heart. Immediately, a ghostly green shadow galloped over. Yin Zai and others suddenly changed their faces and were about to step forward to guard, but Suli raised her hand and said indifferently, "It doesn't matter. It's one of us." In the blink of an eye, the green shadow came to Suli and the light disappeared, revealing its true face. "Master, you finally came out." When Lvu saw Suli, the boulder in his heart disappeared. He breathed a sigh of relief and said in a hurry, "Things are not good. Zihan sect and Su family have joined hands to fight. Headmaster Hua can't hold on any longer." "Fight together?" Su Li's eyes were cold. "Go back to the sect immediately." Lvu immediately took out the spiritual boat given by Hua Yin and asked everyone to board. Then they flew to Hua Jian's sect quickly. At the same time, in the deepest part of the dark black stone forest, a black lotus swayed gently in the cold pool. Beside the pool, a languid woman with a glass of blood-red fruit wine leaned on the soft chair. Her crystal-like amber eyes seemed to be rippling with blood, which was breathtaking. Her red lips gently sipped over the edge of the cup, and her chuckle echoed around. "Giggle. It seems that the weird cave has found a successor. Interesting." In the spiritual boat, Suli sat cross-legged on the deck and narrowed her eyes. "Lvu, tell me the ins and outs." Originally, she had wanted to explore the deepest part of the black stone forest alone. But now that something had happened, She did not dare to delay and could only throw her previous thoughts to the back of her mind. It's Yulin. Yulin's grandfather is Yu Wu Tao, an elder of Weimin branch of Zihan sect. The Su family found out the origin of Su Zini's affair, and the two families forced him at the same time. Fortunately, Beishao Liang used the identity of the little holy boy of Yushu sect to resist the first wave. But in the second wave, Yu Wu Tao and Su Zini's parents came to settle accounts, and Beishao Liang's identity was useless. Now they have bombarded the star-stacked tactical matrix for 3 days, and the spiritual stone inventory of Huajian sect is almost exhausted. Su Li leaned on the edge of the spiritual boat and tapped her knuckles on the spiritual board. Her eyes gradually became cold. Not long after, she wiped the universe ring with her left hand and threw a ball of white light to LVU. Use this to hurry. LVU hurriedly caught it. Looking at it, he couldn't help but be stunned. This is actually a celestial crystal stone. A piece of celestial crystal was worth tens of thousands of supreme-grade spirit stones. He didn't even have a supreme-grade spirit stone, yet his master wanted him to use a celestial crystal to travel? This was too extravagant. What are you waiting for? Su Li frowned, and LVU immediately woke up. He did not dare to disobey, and put the celestial stone into the center of the spiritual boat with a painful expression. The next moment, whoosh! The spiritual boat immediately flew out like a runaway wild horse, and its speed was more than 3 times faster than before. When we arrive at Huajian sect, this spiritual boat will be useless. Yinzai looked at the creaking inside the spiritual boat, and a touch of contemplation flashed in his eyes. Although he was confused by LVU's explanation just now, he also figured out a general idea. First, Su Li was no longer in Yushu sect. It was no wonder. After all, no matter who it was that had been tricked into such a miserable state and survived with great difficulty, how could they possibly return to that cage? Second, the so-called Huajian sect at present was very important to Su Li. Using a celestial crystal to travel explained the problem. Third, it was his chance to show off. Yin Zai's spirit was refreshed, and he looked into the distance with burning eyes. Snowchild and Shin Meiji were not stupid. After understanding the reason, they all prayed in their hearts that the strength of the so-called strong enemy was not too bad. Otherwise, how could they show their determination to follow Su Li in a short time? Old Lady Duhua laughed. Although she didn't know Su Li's identity, there was no doubt that the little master she was serving now was an evildoer. Evildoer represented absolute luck. Unless the natural law was in the way, the rise was unstoppable. Although the Su family and Zihan sect were powerful, they had never had an evildoer. What was more, it was just an elder of Weimin branch and a branch of the Su family who came to find them. It was really an old man who was tired of living. Thinking of this, she leaned heavily on her crutch, and countless poisonous things appeared from the soles of her feet and attached to the surface of the spiritual boat. The speed of the spiritual boat was slightly improved. It should be known that the speed driven by the celestial stone had far exceeded that of Yuanying realm. It was not so easy to improve it again. Su Li looked at old Lady Duhua strangely, and the latter laughed. I can't compete with these rising stars in a fight, so I can only do a little bit. Su Li smiled. Grandma, you are modest. To be able to live to this age in the cultivation world, they really had some hidden skills. Huajian sect. Hua Yan's robe was stained with blood. Standing at the highest point of the main peak, she looked up at the nothingness with a dignified look. Behind her, the first elder, Li Guang, Yuan Shu, Bei Shaoliang and others were still there. Elder LV He of Yushu sect, who was responsible for protecting Bei Shaoliang, had an abnormally pale face. Obviously, he was also injured. After 3 days of silence, seeing that Huajian sect had exhausted all its tricks, he sighed deeply and persuaded, Lord Hua, your big tactical matrix for protecting the sect is indeed very strong, but after the spiritual stones are exhausted, it becomes just a decoration. Now, why are you still insisting? Give up and go back to Yushu sect with the little holy boy. Only in this way can you save your life. Hua Yin shook her head speechlessly. This was the foundation she had worked hard for thousands of years. How could she give up so easily? Besides, it was not the time to give up yet. Her eyes were burning, and she looked into the distance. She had received Su Li's message. Being refused by Hua Yin again. He was angry, but he didn't dare to show it on his face. He said helplessly, "Holy boy, please persuade her." At this time, what's the use of persisting? Will there be a miracle again? Bei Xiaoliang frowned and remained silent. 3 days ago, the 7th branch of Su family joined hands with Yu Wu Tao to fight. They were caught off guard and fought against the 4 practitioners in Yuanying realm. In a moment, they were all seriously injured and retreated. In the crisis, the headmaster immediately opened the 3rd layer of star-stacked tactical matrix, so they had time to breathe. But the consumption of the 3rd layer of star-stacked tactical matrix was extremely terrifying. In addition, there were always people attacking outside, so the consumption of spiritual stones doubled. In just 3 days, the inventory of Huajian sect was used up, and even the top-grade spiritual stones reserved by the headmaster for practice were used up. In such a desperate situation, he really couldn't figure out what trump card the headmaster had to turn the situation around. Was it that Grand Elder? Bei Xiaoliang showed sarcasm in his eyes. If there was such a Grand Elder, he must have escaped since he didn't come out to solve the crisis. Cowardly scoundrel. I should have brought my junior fellow apprentice's ancient sword. There might be a glimmer of hope. He snorted coldly and felt pity. During this time, he and Chi-chan studied the ancient sword together and could use a trace of its power. But they also remembered what the mysterious female senior in the secret realm of shattered spirits said. Before the ancient sword was recast, they dared not take it out to show off. If it was leaked, not only their lives would be in danger, but also their master would be implicated. Therefore, they had been keeping it a secret and hid the ancient sword in the sect. They didn't even report it to their master, Mo Qin. Crack. A crack appeared in the sky shrouded by star-stacked tactical matrix, and then it spread around like a spider web. Hua Yin's pretty face changed slightly. She searched the universe ring, but couldn't take out any more spiritual stones. Even the inferior-grade spiritual stones are gone. She felt bitter in her heart. Seeing this scene, the disciples of the sect suddenly showed panic, packed up their things, and fled the sect. 20% of the disciples fled 3 days ago, and now at least 30 to 40% have left. Even if we can survive, the strength of the sect is less than half of what it used to be. First Elder sighed helplessly, and his heart was bleeding. But the actual situation was much more serious than what he said. When the nest was overturned, there would always be eggs intact. It seemed that the defeat was inevitable, and no one would wait for death stupidly. When most of the Outer Branch disciples left, some of the Outer Branch disciples who had just joined the sect also left quietly. In the blink of an eye, 70% of the disciples left, leaving only 30% of the old disciples who had a strong sense of belonging to Huajian sect. It's over. First Elder felt dizzy. Even if they could survive today, it would be difficult for these hundreds of disciples to survive. Bei Xiaoliang was also gloomy. He didn't expect that he would see Huajian sect defeated with his own eyes when he came back this time, and he couldn't do anything to help. If he went back to get Hanfeng's sword, it would be too late. Headmaster Yuan Shu, who had been standing aside in silence for a long time, finally spoke. He bowed respectfully to Hua Yin with a complicated expression. The extinction of the sect is irreversible, and the headmaster is stubborn. But I still want to continue my cultivation path, so I have to leave now. As soon as this was said, First Elder was shocked and angry, and he blurted out, Yuan Shu, how dare you flee in the face of danger? Who saved you in the crisis? Without the headmaster, you would have been dead for hundreds of years. Hearing this, the complicated expression on Yuan Shu's face suddenly disappeared, and he sneered, It's just a piece of cake for the headmaster to save my life. I have worked hard in Huajian sect for so many years, and it's time to pay it off. Goodbye. After that, he rushed out of the tactical matrix for the protection of the sect on his sword, bowed to the people of Su family from a distance, and disappeared without a trace. Seeing Huajian sect falling apart, Yu Wutao felt very happy and couldn't help laughing. Immortal Hua, even if you were a talent in those days, what can you do in the face of this situation? Bastard! First Elder was so angry that his eyes turned red. He was about to chase out impulsively, but was stopped by Hua Yin with a cold face. Let him go. Chapter 399. As soon as the words came out, many old disciples who had been shaken showed shame on their faces. They kowtowed to Hua Yin 3 times and fled. The remaining 30% of the disciples were reduced again, leaving less than 20%. Hua Yin looked at the more than 100 people who were left in the square and felt a little relieved. If she were to put herself in their shoes, if she were to encounter such a crisis without knowing anything, she might not have stayed either. These 100 people were completely gambling with their lives. Headmaster, why do you? First Elder sighed and believed that Hua Yin was going to disband the sect. Hua Yin smiled and suddenly felt something. She looked up at the sky and whispered, regardless of their talents, they will be the real core of Huajian's sect in the future. First Elder was slightly stunned. Before he could respond, the cracking sound above his head was suddenly magnified. Ha 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 ha, Hua Yin, since you don't want to escape, then go to hell. Yu Wutao laughed wildly and punched at the center of the crack. The next moment, the light curtain broke like a mirror. The sky was full of flying fragments, reflecting the desperate faces of the disciples of Huajian's sect. Hua Yan's face turned cold. She flicked her sleeves and floated up. The universe ring between her fingers flashed with red light, and the blood-colored diamond stone, which had been repaired by Suli, reappeared in her hand. Even if Suli had said that this cup of bloodstone should not be used easily, she couldn't watch the remaining disciples of Huajian's sect die in vain. The 7th branch of Su family, who had been standing aside and watching coldly, felt frightened when they saw the blood-colored diamond stone in Hua Yan's hand. They were about to take action. Suddenly, whoosh! A flying sword shot over with terrifying power. Yu Wutao's face changed slightly, and he hurriedly stopped and took a step back. The flying sword happened to brush his face, run through him and Hua Yin, and stuck straight in the center of the empty square of Huajian's sect. Yu Wutao touched his face and looked gloomy when he saw his hands full of blood. They are not friendly. Hua Yin put away the blood-colored diamond stone and breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at the nothingness where the flying sword came from with a smile on her face. Did they finally arrive? Heh. The Zihan sect and the Su family teamed up to bully a small sect. What an eye-opener. The sneer came from a distance. When Yu Wutao saw that the person was a scholar with a sallow face, he couldn't help but be shocked. After sensing that the latter's cultivation was only at Jindan realm, he was even more ashamed and angry. A junior in Jindan realm made him guard against him for a long time. If this matter was spread out, how could he live in Zihan's sect? Ignorant child, how dare you interfere in my affairs? Die for me. When Yenzai saw Yu Wutao taking the initiative to rush over, his eyes brightened. Instead of retreating, he advanced, laughing and fighting with Yu Wutao. Immortal Bingshu? This. Hua Yin was also surprised to see the person. Yuling's sect had always wanted to unify the 3 sections. Seeing that Huajian's sect was lonely, they should be happy. Why did they suddenly show up to help? Before she could figure out the situation, another charming voice came from the horizon, and 2 people appeared in the sky. One was a seductive woman, and the other looked like a child. His entire body was snow white, and his expression was cold. With a single glance, one could tell that the 2 of them were not simple characters. The pneuma of the 2 can't be guessed. Yuanying realm? When Su Lin, the head of the 7th branch of Su family, saw the people coming, his heart thumped, and he knew something was wrong. After thinking for a few seconds, he was about to step forward and clench his fists to test, but he saw that the 2 people in the air suddenly looked at him as if they were looking for prey. Then, without saying a word, they swooped down. Oh no, let's fight together. Su Lin looked stern, and immediately called the 2 elders in Yuanying realm of Su family to fight together. But at this moment, Snow Child's lips hummed, and a clear word "fix" echoed in the nothingness. What? I can't move. Su Lin's pupils shrank in horror, and he could only watch the two elders fight. But at this time, Xian Meiji took a string of bells from her waist and shook them gently. The bewitching jingle sounded in the ears of the two elders. The two elders of Su family had no power to resist. They stopped like puppets without energy supply, and let Xian Meiji and Snow Child hit their chests with their palms respectively. They vomited blood and flew backward. Run. You can't beat him. Su Lin was shocked. After struggling with all his strength for 3 seconds, he finally broke free from the spell of Snow Child. Without saying a word, he took the two elders to escape quickly, without looking at Yu Wu Tao. Just a very excellent daughter died. He had many children, and he could cultivate them again. He could never lose his life here. The old man ran away so fast. Xian Meiji, who couldn't catch up with him, pursed her mouth and said unhappily. Snow Child nodded and couldn't help but send a sound transmission. These 3 practitioners are too weak. They haven't even reached the level of Yuan. I don't know if our performance is qualified in her eyes. Hearing Snow Child mention this, the pride in Xian Meiji's eyes immediately disappeared and was replaced with deep worry. Brother Yin is so lucky. That old guy can't run away. Snow Child turned to look at Yu Wu Tao, who was covered with blood and exhausted, and continued to send a sound transmission with envy. At this moment, Yu Wu Tao, who was mentioned by Snow Child, was indeed facing a life-and-death crisis, and the crisis came inexplicably, which made him confused. Boom! With the help of Yin Zai's palm force, Yu Wu Tao spat blood again. His face was pale, and he could finally spare energy to speak. Fellow practitioner, wait a minute. Forgive me for my stupidity. We have no hatred or resentment. Why do we have to fight to the death? Yin Zai shook off the blood on his flying sword, and with a smile on his sallow face, he replied, if I remember correctly, you were the one who wanted to take my life first. Since that's the case, why can't I kill you? Hearing this, Yu Wu Tao was so angry that he almost spat blood again. How could he know that the combat power of a practitioner in Jindan stage was even higher than his? He had no power to fight back in the hands of this person. It was terrible. After thinking quickly for a moment, seeing that Yin Zai was about to fight again, he hurriedly stopped him. He couldn't hide the panic in his voice. Fellow practitioner, why do you do this? I am willing to compensate you to appease your frightened heart. How about it? Swish. A sword flashed across his neck as fast as lightning. The expression on Yu Wu Tao's face froze immediately. After a moment, his head was separated from his body, and blood rushed to the sky. Phew! When the flying sword returned to his hand, Yin Zai casually put it into the universe ring and said lightly, nothing. If he wasted any more time, the spiritual boat would arrive. If he hadn't solved everything by the time Suli arrived, wouldn't he be very incompetent? Who are you pretending for? Xian Meiji rolled her eyes. Although Snow Child didn't speak, his eyes were twitching. In the Cave of Inheritance, why didn't he see that Yin Zai was so sultry? On the top of the main peak below, everyone, including Hua Yin, was at a loss. Except for Hua Yin's speculation in her heart, no one knew what had happened. Seeing that Yu Wu Tao was simply beheaded, First Elder felt cold on his neck. He looked at Yin Zai standing in the nothingness, and his eyes were full of horror. Amidst this strange and awkward atmosphere, a spirit boat covered in cuts and bruises finally sailed over slowly. Suli, who had changed her face, stood at the bow of the boat and glanced at Yu Wu Tao's body on the ground. She flicked her fingers at Yin Zai, and a white light shot over. Yin Zai caught it subconsciously. He thought it would be the storage room for the reward, but he didn't expect it was just a jade slip, which didn't record any mental method, but a series of spiritual medicines with unfamiliar names. When he was wondering, Su Li's sound transmission sounded in his ear. When these things are collected, the damage to your foundation will be recovered. It's up to you. Hearing this, Yin Zai couldn't understand what it meant. He nodded fiercely while trembling slightly. How could he forget that this person's medical skills were absolutely at the level of a miracle-working doctor? How could a damage to the foundation be a problem for her? As for you two, Su Li turned her eyes and looked at Xian Meiji and Snow Child, who were staring at Yin's eye enviously. They immediately lowered their heads in shame. Su Li looked at the two poor children and couldn't get angry. Her cold words became a little gentle. Don't do it again. Xian Meiji and Snow Child's dim eyes lit up at the same time, and they nodded in unison. Hua Yin was still in a daze and almost said Su Li's name. Then she was awakened by Su Li's eyes. She immediately reacted and said, Grand Elder, they are. Su Li glanced at Bei Xiaoliang, who was completely petrified, and shook her head. Let's talk about this later. Li Guang, who was still absent-minded, was suddenly awakened by such a call. He said respectfully, I'm here. Su Li pointed to the remaining disciples of the sect. Now there are few disciples in the sect. Yuan Shu betrayed the sect, and Wang Yu has been executed by me. You are the only one who can take the position of Mount Head. Do you understand? What? Junior sister apprentice Wang is dead? Li Guang was shocked and didn't know whether to be happy or sad for a while. Bei Xiaoliang was very surprised. Wang Yu didn't show up for a long time, and he had long suspected that she had escaped. He didn't expect that she had been executed by Su Li. This couldn't be better. She plotted against me. She only has herself to blame. Su Li said and glanced at He meaningfully. Then she said no more and called Yin Zai and others into the hall. Only First Elder and Bei Xiaoliang were still standing on the peak. Seeing the whole scene, First Elder was stunned for a long time. Then he murmured, It turns out that our Huajian sect really has a Grand Elder. When Su Li walked away, he breathed a sigh of relief. He broke out in a cold sweat as if he had been fished out of the water. He couldn't see through Su Li, so he wanted to secretly use the secret method of Yushu sect to find out the real cultivation of this woman, but he still didn't sense anything. Not only that, but he was clearly discovered by that glance just now. Fortunately, the little holy boy has an old relationship with this sect. Otherwise, he would have offended. He had a lingering fear. His strength was not much stronger than Yu Wutao's. With the protection of such a mysterious and powerful existence, even if all the members of Huajian sect die, it can definitely develop in a short time. The relationship between the little holy boy and this sect is absolutely beneficial and harmless. After the fear, he thought happily in his heart. He didn't notice the indescribable complexity in Bei Xiaoliang's eyes. Chapter 400. What happened next was much calmer. Li Guang went down the mountain to reorganize the remaining disciples. In fact, there was nothing to reorganize. Although Grand Elder didn't take action personally, they also saw that there were several old monsters of Yuanying realm among the strong men who surrendered to Grand Elder. Grand Elder must be more unfathomable. With such thoughts, all the remaining disciples were full of hope for the future. They didn't feel dispirited at all, and soon devoted themselves to the passion of rebuilding the new sect. Yinzai stayed for a while and left. Yuling's sect was completely under his control. Since he decided to follow Su Li, he was no longer obsessed with the identity of a headmaster. After he went back to reorganize Yuling's sect, it could be incorporated into the new Huajian sect. Old Lady Duhua and Snow Child lived in Huajian sect, digesting the insights of the trip to Zhonglei's cave. At this moment, in the hall of the main peak, Hua Yin dismissed the resentful First Elder and couldn't wait to ask, Where did you get so many seniors of Yuanying realm? If they are willing to join Huajian sect, as long as the number of our disciples reaches a certain level, we can definitely rush to the top sects in Juzhou region, second only to the 25 sects. Su Li took a sip of the scented tea made by Hua Yin and smiled deeply. My purpose is not only to join the top sections. Hua Yin was slightly shocked and blurted out, What do you want to do? Su Li shook her head. It's too early to say now. As for those people, only old Lady Duhua and immortal Bingshu can stay, and the two juniors don't count. As she said, Su Li mentioned a little about the origins of Snow Child and Xian Meiji. Hua Yin was shocked and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was more curious about how Su Li subdued the two arrogant talents. It's no use thinking too much. My plan. I don't have much confidence. You will know it in the future, so it doesn't make much sense to say it now. You take these to heal first, and I'll go to check the tactical matrix." After Su Li said that, she threw a universe ring and turned to leave. Hua Yin was stunned for a moment. She stopped thinking and scanned the universe ring with her divine awareness. She saw that there were 300 celestial stones in it in addition to the healing ammunition. Su Li went down the mountain alone and went to the square where the disciples of the sect were before. Star-stacked tactical matrix is broken. What is broken is not the matrix core, but the center of the transformation of Wacken and the power of the tactical matrix. She vaguely remembers that it was set somewhere in the square. At this moment, the square had become empty. All the disciples had been taken back by Li Guang to Fujian Peak to heal. Although they did not participate in the previous battle, they were also affected. With a light snap, Su Li landed on the ground. Her cold eyes glanced over, and her psychic awareness spread out. Soon, she found the place and went to the right. When she reached the edge of the square, she gently waved her left hand. The next moment, a red light flashed, and a rusty central device suddenly appeared and fell into her hand. Putting away the hub, Su Li suddenly said to herself, "Come out." Bei Xiaoliang, who was beside one of the pillars on the edge of the square, appeared awkwardly. He didn't expect that he could hide from Su Li's detection. After scratching his head, he directly walked over and bowed, saying, "Disciple Bei Xiaoliang pays respect to Grand Elder." Now the doubts in his heart had been completely solved. When they were in the secret realm of shattered spirits, Su Li treated him differently. She must have recognized that he used to be a disciple of Huajian's sect. Su Li turned around and looked at Bei Xiaoliang up and down. She nodded gently and said, "It seems that you didn't slack off after you went back. Grand Elder, you flatter me. My achievements are nothing." Bei Xiaoliang hurriedly replied, not daring to be arrogant, "You have a good understanding, so you don't need to belittle yourself." Su Li was speechless. She could see that Bei Xiaoliang's pneuma was smooth and flawless, and she seemed to have touched a trace of Taishu. After Yushu, it was Taishu. Yushu tactics was the famous practice method of Yushu sect, but the real Holy Sun and Holy Girl level task would be given the more ancient Taishu tactics. Yushu tactics was the simplified version of Taishu tactics. Only when Yushu tactics reached the consummation could it be possible to practice Taishu tactics. Thinking of this, Su Li looked up and seemed to see through everything. She saw LV who was healing on Fujian Peak. The personal protection of a Yuanying realm is not something that my master can decide. It seems that this boy will be taught Taishu tactics soon, so I don't need to teach him privately to avoid trouble. Thinking of this, Su Li took out a carrier rune and handed it to Bei Xiaoliang. There was a trace of gentleness on her calm face. "You should know what to do. If you are wronged in Yushu sect, come back." Bei Xiaoliang took over the carrier rune as if he had received a treasure. He responded with tears in his eyes, "I understand." A few days later, Bei Xiaoliang left. With Su Li's words, he left with peace of mind. A few days later, Yanzai merged the whole Yuling sect into Huajian sect. The number of people in the two sects was very different, and it was quite difficult to get along. Huayan soon came to Su Li and said with a smile, "Now, whether it is called Huajian sect or Yuling sect, some people are dissatisfied. You are the Grand Elder of our sect. Why don't you give the sect a new name? Anyway, I named Huajian sect casually. It's good for you to change it." "Should I?" Su Li opened her eyes, thought for a moment, and said softly, "Let's name it an I." The trajectory of her life was nothing more than going against the current. Whether she went against the mighty figures who controlled the chessboard or against the natural law, it was always the word an I. Huayan looked at Su Li in a daze. At this moment, the pneuma naturally exuded from her old friend made her a little sad. Yes, some justice. No matter how much she paid, she would get it back. Good name. Huayan showed a big smile and turned to leave. As a result, the reputation of an I sect spread quickly and quickly replaced Huajian sect and Yuling sect. Except for Ming's sect, one of the three sects, who tried to figure out the meaning, it did not cause much trouble. New sects rose every day in Jiuzhou region, and it was common for a small sect to be established. In the next year, an I sect gradually got on the right track. The difficult running in at the beginning finally paid off. After everyone accepted their new identity as disciples of an ice sect, Li Guang had less trouble. In the past year, Su Li did nothing but refine the celestial stone wholeheartedly. This was the first real closed-door practice since her reincarnation. Jean Ying was released from the nightmare and mixed into the disciples of Naiman branch. A group of high-level people secretly looked after her, so her practice time was also smooth. Black, the nightmare, fell into a deep sleep. It seemed that the Dream Eater had entered the evolutionary stage. When it woke up, it should be able to help. One day, in the forbidden area of the back mountain of an ice sect, a violent fluctuation of spiritual power escaped. Even if there was a tactical matrix to block it, Hua Yin, who was outside, still felt frightened. It seemed that if a trace of spiritual power leaked out, she would be seriously injured. She stared at the blurred figure in the tactical matrix intently. She was so nervous and shocked that she had long been numb. 1 year was enough for her to accept the fact that Su Li was still in Lianqi realm. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would never believe that there would be a practitioner in Lianqi realm whose strength was comparable to the peak of Yuanying realm in the world. In the tactical matrix, Su Li's state was not as dangerous as Hua Yin imagined. Instead, it was extremely comfortable. The 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Tut-tut. You also prepared nearly 1,000 Zhuji elixirs to transform genuine energy. Breaking through to Zhuji realm will be a piece of cake, and there will be no danger. Black Lotus Ring emerged from Su Li's ring finger, and he was full of energy. In this year, he also absorbed a lot of celestial stones. Although he was not sure about the complete recovery of Black Lotus Ring, his life as the spirit of Black Lotus Ring was not so difficult after all. Su Li glanced at Black Lotus Ring and did not speak. She focused on the pubic region. With the consumption of Zhuji elixirs, the outline of the foundation of the pubic region slowly appeared. Black Lotus had long been accustomed to Su Li's temperament, and his enthusiasm was not cold at all. He continued to shake his head and said, "In ancient times, there were many sayings about Zhuji realm. It was not as rough as you are now. If the talent is strong, the Zhuji platform can produce a vision and produce all kinds of incredible supernatural power." Su Li raised her eyes slightly. Just the ghost clan? She had never seen the supernatural power of any human clan. Of course not. Black Lotus cried out, his tone filled with disdain. All living beings in the world. Even if you human clan are born weak, you have a large number. There will always be a few outliers born. There are many evildoers with supernatural power. You haven't seen it because the practice methods of cultivation are too rubbish. Su Li pursed her lips. Black Lotus's words were a bit straightforward, but he was right. In his eyes, if the Qingshui circle was developed with the Qingshui circle in ancient times, it would be wiped out in less than 1 day. Was the gap too big? Su Li's eyes flashed, and she suddenly remembered the cage mentioned by immortal Song Lei. Could it be? Hey, what are you thinking about? Even if you don't have to worry about the process of Zhuji realm, you should at least see what the shape of your foundation is. It is the first time for me to see a practitioner who is still distracted when breaking through. You are the first one. Black Lotus interrupted Su Li's thinking angrily. Su Li came back to her senses, restrained her thoughts, and smiled slightly. Well, even if her guess was right, what could he do with his meager strength now? Let's worry about the future in the future. Hurry up. Tell me if there is any abnormal phenomenon. You have the body of evil ghost, and you have practiced to the 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm. You are absolutely abnormal. If there is no abnormal phenomenon, I will look down on you. Su Li was not affected by Black Lotus, and she calmly looked at her pubic region. But this look still made her face a little strange. Ha ha ha. Is it that the 12th grade Black Lotus gives birth to the abnormal phenomenon of the shadow of Black Phoenix? Black Lotus laughed and snorted. The phenomenon of Zhuji realm of each generation of the body of evil ghost is exactly the same. Now you know how powerful I am. How can this king's knowledge be something a mere junior like you can imagine? Su Li listened to the laughter coming from Black Lotus Ring, and suddenly felt that Black Lotus was a little pitiful. However, she still couldn't help interrupting. It doesn't seem to be. Oh! Black Lotus was like a drake being strangled, and he could no longer say a word. Chapter 401. I don't believe it. Black Lotus recovered from the embarrassment and shouted, Little Suli, don't lie to me. You are a body of evil ghost, but you are not afraid of the divine thunder of the 5 elements. You even subdued one of them, which is very magical. The 12th grade Black Lotus is the supreme form of Zhuji of Ghost Clan, which is extremely noble. If even you only have the 11th grade Black Lotus, I really doubt that those sloppy and ordinary bodies of evil ghost in the past are fake. Hearing this, Suli smiled slightly. Black Lotus should describe other bodies of evil ghost as sloppy and ordinary, which put her in a very special position. She remembered that when Black Lotus first contacted her, he was very disgusted with her body of evil ghost that had not even awakened her talent. Who told you that I only have the 11th grade Black Lotus? Suli smiled and sent a video to Black Lotus while talking. Black Lotus was slightly stunned, and then he saw the content of the video and suddenly said in surprise, what was reflected in its mind was an extremely mystical phenomenon. The pitch-black starry sky was dotted with blue stars. From time to time, arcs of blue lightning would flash across the sky. A black star was hanging high in the sky, and under the star, a black lotus throne was slowly rotating. The 18 lotus leaves were plump and moist. Starry sky vision? The 18th grade Black Lotus. Black Lotus gasped and stammered, This? I have been a spirit for more than 40,000 years, and I have never seen a starry sky vision. The Black Lotus has 18 grades. No, I have never heard of it, let alone seen it. If you get the magical power of Black Lotus transforming into sword and refine a total of 18 Black Lotus swords, my God. Suli listened quietly. When she heard Black Lotus swords, her eyes suddenly flashed slightly. Black Lotus ring. No matter what the real name of this treasure of Ghost Clan was, the Black Lotus mark on it was enough to show the high status of the Black Lotus in Ghost Clan. And the Black Lotus, which was the foundation of her body of evil ghost, and the magical power of sword derived from the Black Lotus, were all inseparable from the form of the Black Lotus. Is the body of evil ghost really a taboo of Ghost Clan? She murmured. When Black Lotus heard this, his nagging stopped abruptly. After a long time, Black Lotus said in a completely different and complicated tone, Maybe not a long time ago, but my memory doesn't lie. Every generation of evil ghost is the enemy of the whole world, and they all die miserably. Not a good end? Suli repeated. Her eyes flickered, and no one knew what she was thinking. Black Lotus sighed, and the secret chamber fell into silence. In the main hall of the main peak, Hua Yin was discussing important matters with Yin Zai and others. Suddenly, a figure flashed in the middle of the long table, and an extra person appeared. Everyone was shocked. The conversation stopped. When the Great Elder, who was sitting on the second seat on the right, saw the person's face clearly, his eyes were immediately filled with shock. Isn't this the inner disciple who went to the flower pond to cultivate, Suyu? What was she doing here? Before he could recover from the shock, he heard Hua Yin say with a smile, What's wrong? You finally decided to show your true face? Suli smiled lightly. I believe that everyone here is not stupid enough to let the Grand Elder of your sect become the target of public criticism, right? Of course not. Yin Zai suppressed the excitement in his heart and spoke first. Then he glanced coldly at the faces of the Great Elder and Li Guang. His meaning was self-evident. What? The true face of the Grand Elder is Suyu? It turns out that the Grand Elder has been hiding on Danxia Mount before. No wonder Wang Yu was exposed and died in the hands of the Grand Elder. The Great Elder secretly exclaimed in his heart. Thinking of all the things about Suyu before, he quickly speculated some information and quickly saluted with hands folded. The Grand Elder is powerful, which is a blessing for our Anai sect. How can I harm the Anai sect? Li Guang nodded in agreement. He had never seen Suyu before. Except that he was a little curious about Su Li's young face, he was not very surprised. Yin Zai, who knew more news, finally confirmed that Su Li was really reincarnated. Dongfang Wushue's speculation is right. After reincarnation, Miss Su has become more powerful. Her bone age is no more than 100, but her means are comparable to the late stage of Yuanying realm. Yin Zai sighed and rejoiced. He could follow Su Li in the real world. Such a good thing could happen to him. If it didn't really happen, he wouldn't even dare to think about it. How was the Inai sect recently? After a while, everyone calmed down. Su Li glanced at the 4 people in front of her and asked in a low voice. Hua Yin glanced at Yin Zai and nodded with a smile. With the help of Elder Yin, the people of the 2 sects have been integrated into one after 1 year. They are all in an Inai sect, but, speaking of this, she frowned slightly. The people of Ming's sect are somewhat dishonest. That's right. Yin Zai took over the topic and said in a deep voice, after our 2 sects merged, Ming's sect was a little afraid. In the past 6 months, they have never stopped probing. Their disciples often have conflicts, but there has been no big conflict. Su Li nodded gently, and a light flashed in her eyes. Needless to say, an elder died on one side, and the 7th branch was seriously injured on the other side. Zihan's sect and Su family wouldn't let go of the enmity so easily. It was extremely quiet in the hall. Only Su Li's knuckles gently tapped on the table, making a rhythmic sound. After a while, Su Li raised her head and said to everyone, restrain the disciples of the Inai sect. Compared with the 2 sects, our foundation is too weak and can't afford to be tossed around. Since they don't want to be honest about the matter of Ming's sect, I will go there. Hearing this, everyone was slightly surprised except Yin Zai. Hua Yin couldn't help but say, Grand Elder, Ming's sect is not easy to deal with. Although there are no decent seniors in their sect, they have a book tactical matrix that is very difficult to deal with. Once trapped in it, it is difficult to get out. It doesn't matter. I have my own plan. Su Li shook her head and said no more. She turned to look at Yin Zai. How about the things you collected? Yin Zai scratched his head and said with a wry smile, only the Dishin grass is missing. Others are all found, but I haven't even inquired about the Dishin grass. Su Li chuckled. Of course you can't inquire about it. This medicine has always been monopolized by others. Ah. Yin Zai was surprised and happy. It was good to have news. Hua Yin hesitated. After hearing Su Li's words, her face finally changed slightly. Is the Dishin grass? Su Li glanced at her and said in a flat voice, if my plan can succeed, the Dishin grass is nothing. Hua Yan's eyes trembled slightly, and her mind was shocked. She suddenly stopped talking. Only she knew how big a storm Su Li's words would set off. Well, I will go to deal with Ming's sect first. Su Li got up and was about to leave. Yin Zai couldn't help but stand up hurriedly and said, I will go too. Practice hard, and there will be many opportunities to take action in the future. Su Li didn't stop. Her figure disappeared, leaving only her voice still echoing. On Danxia Mount, Jin Ying still lived in the side hall, even though the mount head of Danxia Mount was still replaced by the original people of Yuling sect. Junior sister apprentice, you finally appeared. Su Li stepped in. Jin Ying was counting the spiritual stones in the hall in boredom. When she heard the voice, she turned around and saw the person coming. She immediately cried out in surprise. Su Li came and sat beside Jin Ying. She took out a jade slip and put it in front of her. What is this? Jin Ying blinked curiously. Su Li smiled. The holy method you want. Half a day later, Jin Ying got the holy method under the guidance of Su Li and entered the state of practice. Su Li walked out of the palace and saw the towering book pavilion at a glance. She thought of all the things that happened in that year. She stepped out and disappeared. On the top floor of the quaint white tower, a stooped old man was slowly sweeping the ground with a shabby broom. The sun outside the window was warm and shining on the body. Suddenly, the old man sensed something and pressed down. There was a shadow of a person on the ground. His pupils shrank, and he looked up. When he saw the person, he immediately smiled. I'm Hua Weiyun, Grand Elder. Su Li pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She looked for a moment and found some problems. This person's pneuma was almost integrated with the White Tower, and it was only limited to the top floor. If he left here, he would immediately die of thirst like a fish without water. I heard some of the reasons from Hua Yin. For the sake of your guarding Huajian's sect, I will help you. After a moment of silence, Su said, "Give me your practice method." Hearing this, Hua Weiyun, who was originally lifeless, immediately burst with dazzling light in his eyes. Without saying anything, he engraved the mental method he practiced on a jade slip and handed it to Su. He said, "I learned this mental method from this wall. Unfortunately, after I succeeded, all the words on the wall disappeared." Su took it and frowned immediately. Hua Weiyun's heart thumped, and the joy in his heart was a little less. Although Hua Yin praised the Grand Elder, it seemed that he couldn't help him at this moment. It's also a holy method, but it is incomplete. Su glanced at it and was surprised. She walked to the smooth wall and touched it. She could vaguely feel the faint pneuma of time emitted from it. It was obviously an incomplete inheritance, which was accidentally obtained by Hua Weiyun. Because of the defect, Hua Weiyun practiced it with malpractice, which made it integrated with the top floor of the White Tower and couldn't be separated. Compared with the extreme tricks I have mastered, this method is more moderate and peaceful. It is more suitable for ordinary practitioners to practice. So, I will spend some time to complete this method and use it for inherited disciples of an eye sect to practice. It is not bad. Su pondered for a moment and made up her mind. She only told Hua Weiyun to wait for her news and left directly. Hua Weiyun watched Su leave and smiled bitterly, thinking that his expectation this time would be in vain. When Su set off for Ming sect, there was a lot of noise in the conference hall of Ming sect. What I said is true. Chapter 402. 34 Chinese net in 1 second. This is a wonderful free reading without a pop-up window. Ho ho ho. As soon as Elder Qing finished his words, a brown-robed elder with triangular eyes sitting opposite him sneered mercilessly, "Qing Weiyue, were you frightened by Bingshu in Wuyang Town? Ming sect is not afraid of a mere practitioner of Jindan realm." Right. Before Qing Weiyue had time to refute, First Elder, who was sitting with a sullen face, said and looked at Qing Weiyue with cold eyes. "With the protection of the holy matrix of Liuhe Book, even if the mysterious woman you said is several times more powerful than a mortal Bingshu and reaches Yuanying realm, she can never break through the holy matrix." Qing Weiyue's heart sank. Thinking of the relationship between sects, he kept silent for a moment and couldn't help but refute. If so, why did First Elder agree with Su family so rudely? How dare you? First Elder seemed to be trampled on his sore foot. He stood up immediately and pounded the table to scold. "Qing Weiyue, you really let me down. How can you boost others' morale and diminish your own prestige? Who on earth is diminishing our prestige?" Qing Weiyue also pulled a long face and was not afraid of First Elder at all. First Elder's face became more and more gloomy. He said angrily, "Although Su family is not one of the 25 sects, it is better than them. To some extent, it is even more horrible than Yushu sect. I just got the news that Su Zipei, the eldest daughter of Su family who disappeared 1,000 years ago, is not dead. Instead, she is accepted as a personal disciple by the lord of a holy sect in another big region. She has a promising future." What? Hearing this, everyone was shocked. Su Zipei really got a great opportunity in the reincarnation environment. At that time, her talent and strength were always one step lower than Holy Girl Su. Now Su Zipei is so successful, but Holy Girl Su has been dead for 1,000 years. What a pity. This is the cultivation circle. If you are unlucky, no matter how talented you are, you can't enjoy it. There was a lot of discussion in the hall. Qing Weiyue was also a little shocked, but he soon calmed down and sneered. "How ugly is the face of Su family? Everyone in Juzhou region knows it. Ming sect asks a tiger for its skin today, and we will be swallowed by it one day. First Elder, don't regret it." Without another word, he flicked his sleeves and left. The Great Elder watched him leave with a gloomy face. In the end, he couldn't help but flip the table and curse, "Bastard. Do you think you can order me around just because you've been in the sect for hundreds of years?" Upon seeing this, the other elders hurried forward to comfort him. "Great Elder, please calm down." Calm down. Elder Qing was just thinking for the sake of the sect. He just couldn't get over it. He will definitely understand your painstaking efforts in the future. Yes, when we establish a relationship with the Su family, we can destroy the Ni sect easily. When the first elder heard everyone's comments, an inexplicable and strange look flashed in his eyes, but he pretended to be gratified on the surface and sighed. It's good that you can understand. The sect master travels all year round, and this old man feels deeply responsible, so his temper is a little violent. I've made a fool of myself in front of everyone. Haha, what are you saying, great elder? We are a family. Not bad, haha. Outside the hall, Elder Qing heard the laughter inside. He was angry, but more helpless. The great elder was determined to ruin the foundation of the Ming sect for hundreds of years, and the others were all flatterers and fence-sitters. At the moment, he had no way to remedy it, so he couldn't help but start to think of a way to escape. Yes, escape. Although he had some feelings for the Ming sect, most of them were for the sect master. Now that the sect master was not here, he couldn't stop the general trend even if he risked his life. He didn't want to be a mantis trying to stop a chariot. If the sect master knew my thoughts, he would probably be a little disappointed. Qing Weiyue laughed at himself bitterly, shook his head, and walked down the mountain road. Suddenly, he saw a petite girl standing in the middle of the road. She didn't wear the clothes of the Ming sect disciples. She wore a pure white dress, simple but unique temperament. With a jade hairpin, she looked simple and pure. He slightly exclaimed and curiously greeted her. Perhaps attracted by her temperament, he asked in a soft voice, "Which peak are you, a new disciple? Why are you here? You don't even wear the clothes of the disciples of the Ming sect?" At this time, there was indeed a new batch of disciples in the Ming sect. Qing Weiyue couldn't see through Su Li, so he thought she was an ordinary mortal and didn't think much. Su Li was a little stunned. She blinked and said, "I don't know which peak I'm a disciple of. I just walked and walked, and then I came here." Qing Weiyue didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and sent Su Li to his flying magic weapon. While flying to one of the delicate peaks, he said, "The female disciples of the Ming sect are all on the Xianu peak. The peak just now is the residence of the sect master. Ordinary disciples are not allowed to go there. Girl, fortunately, you met me. Remember it next time." Su Li nodded slightly with a slight smile. At this moment, she changed her mind. It was better to give the Ming sect a chance to choose than to destroy the sect and hurt the innocent. The person in front of her might be a good leader of the next generation. Qing Weiyue didn't know that his subconscious action changed the fate of the whole sect. After sending Su Li to the Xianu peak, he said something and left. The supervising disciple of the Xianu peak glanced at the register with a strange look, but he didn't find any disciple named Suyu. But since it was sent by the elder, it couldn't be wrong. After thinking for a moment, he simply added the name Suyu at the end of the register. Then, for the sake of Qing Weiyue, he arranged Su Li's identity token and residence for her. Su Li was quite amused when she took the things to her residence. She inexplicably changed from an invader to a new disciple of the Xianu peak. Putting on the cyan robe of a new disciple, Su Li's eyes flashed. She opened the door and walked to the top of the Xianu peak without looking back. "Hey, junior sister apprentice Su, you can't go there." The supervising disciple who was about to go back saw this scene and immediately stepped forward to stop her. But when he just came to Su Li, he was shrouded by an invisible force and couldn't move. "What's going on?" He showed horror in his eyes, but he couldn't change his expression. At this time, Su Li chuckled. "Don't worry. I just want you to accompany me to the top of the peak. You have performed well all the way. I don't want to kill a disciple of my own sect." "My own sect?" Upon hearing these words, the disciple in charge immediately relaxed. He thought to himself, "So it's a senior in the sect who likes to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger." Thinking of this, not only did he not panic, but he also felt happy as if he had been chosen by a big shot. Naturally, he didn't understand that the my own sect that Su Li said was completely different from what he understood. Su Li walked up the mountain along the neat white stone road. There were supervising disciples following her all the way, but no one came forward to ask questions, which saved a lot of trouble. She looked up at the sky, and her eyes showed the color of deduction. The protective tactical matrix of the sect was obviously broken and had no hindrance to her. She didn't know where the weird book tactical matrix that Hua Yin said was. While thinking, they had arrived in front of the hall on the top of the peak. This time, the identity of the supervising disciple didn't work. Seeing that they wanted to enter the hall, two guarding disciples immediately stepped forward to stop them and said coldly, "Do you have the Order of the Mount Head?" The supervising disciple grinned and thought that Su Li was going to show her identity. But he saw that Su Li waved her hand, and the two guarding disciples rolled their eyes and plopped to the ground. This senior? The supervising disciple finally realized that something was wrong and panicked. Before he turned around and ran away, he felt his head was in a daze, and he fell to the ground like the two guarding disciples. Who is presumptuous in my Zion Mount? The people in the hall quickly noticed the abnormality, and a stern voice came. Su Li looked calm. She stretched out her hand and flicked her fingers. The 10th grade tactical matrix obtained from Chan Xianghan was thrown out, and the entire hall was instantly wrapped in it. This change happened in a flash. The people in the hall had no time to react, and it was too late to escape from the range of the tactical matrix. Who comes to ask for advice? Why do you hide and use such despicable tricks? The voice came again from the hall. The distance was getting closer, but the tone was much weaker than before. Su Li slowly stepped into the hall and saw a man and a woman standing in front of the hall. The man was in the early stage of Jindan realm, and the woman was in the late stage of Jindan realm. Are you the Mount Head of Zion Mount? Su Li's eyes fell on the beautiful woman, and her eyes were indifferent. The woman frowned and spread out her perception, but no matter how she sensed, the girl in front of her was a mist, and she couldn't see anything. This situation could only happen to two kinds of people. The first kind was that this woman had no cultivation and was an ordinary person. Two disciples in Zhuji realm could break into the hall. Obviously, it could only be the second kind. This woman's cultivation was above the two of them. Thinking of this, the woman felt a pressure in her heart. She took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I am Gong Li Xuan, the Mount Head of Zion Mount. Who are you? Your surname is Gong? A memory flashed in Su Li's mind. Without saying anything, she went to the man beside Gong Li Xuan and knocked him out. She asked, "Do you know Gong Xiangjuan? Gong Min?" Gong Li Xuan saw that her companion was knocked out, and she was relieved. But after hearing Su Li's question, she immediately shook her head. No, that's a pity. If you know her, I may let you go. Su Li sighed slightly. Then she put her palm on the fainted man's vital acupuncture point. Gong Li Xuan's face instantly turned pale, and she quickly said, "I really don't know her. Even if you kill me and my junior fellow apprentice, I don't know them. There are too many people with the same surname in the world. Is it wrong for my surname to be Gong?" Crack. Su Li knocked Gong Li Xuan out with one palm. It seemed that this woman really didn't know her. Well, I have met enough people now, and there is no need to inquire deliberately, she said to herself, grabbed the two fainted people, stood on the flying sword, and flew to a nearby mountain. After arriving at the third mountain peak, Su Li stood quietly in the void of the hall of the sect. The shadow of the isolation tactical matrix appeared and disappeared from time to time, blocking the sight of ordinary disciples of Meng's sect, but deliberately allowing practitioners above Jindan realm to see it clearly. Behind her, four unconscious figures lay quietly in the void, and three of them were the Mount Heads. If Su Li opened the last barrier of the 10th grade tactical matrix and let ordinary disciples see it, Meng's sect would absolutely be in chaos instantly. Don't let me wait too long. Su Li narrowed her eyes and whispered. A figure flashed in the hall of the main peak and finally appeared. Chapter 403. Above the nothingness, the first elder of the Meng sect slowly flew out from the hall of the main peak, followed by several elders. Seeing that Su Li didn't have anything under her feet, they were all shocked and frightened. Those who could fly in the air were at least in Yuanying realm. Although he was full of confidence when quarreling with Qing Weiyue, how could he not be afraid when facing an enemy in Yuanying realm? That was someone who could easily kill him. When did the Ming sect offend an old monster in Yuanying realm? He was confused, but he had to fly to Suli on his sword and stop. He cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please calm down. I am Peng Yukai, the first elder of the Ming sect. If my Ming sect has offended you, you can sit down and talk. There is no need to use weapons to destroy the harmony." Harmony? Suli smiled meaningfully and said softly, "I heard that your sect has been bullying my disciples in the past year. It is not me who hurt the harmony first." Hearing this, the first elder's face changed slightly, and he blurted out, "Are you the grand elder of the Yanai sect?" Suli glanced at Qing Weiwei, who flew behind the first elder, and was shocked. She said coldly, "Is there any other grand elder in the Yanai sect, huh? I just practiced in isolation for a year, and your Ming sect almost bullied my disciples. If I practiced in isolation for 100 years, wouldn't I have been destroyed by you? Senior, please calm down." The grand elder felt a chill run down his spine when he heard this, and his scalp went numb. He hurriedly said, "It's our fault for not teaching our disciples well, causing the misunderstanding to occur. We have no intention of plotting against your sect. Please investigate this matter, Senior." "Oh?" Suli sneered with a faint smile, who said in the hall of the main peak that he would unite with the Su family to deal with our Anai sect. As soon as he said that, First Elder and others were in a panic. What they said just now was heard by the Grand Elder of Anai sect. What should we do? The arrangement of the Su family is not perfect, and the Holy Tactical Matrix has not been opened. How can I deal with the enemy? The first elder was so anxious that his forehead was full of cold sweat. The atmosphere at this moment dropped to the freezing point and almost solidified. Senior, at this critical moment, Qing Weiwei braced himself to step forward and said with hands folded, "For the sake of what happened before, can we sit down and talk?" As Qing Weiwei said, he sighed inwardly. After all, he still cared about the sect master's life-saving grace. Although there was a 99% chance that this female senior did not put him in her eyes, but he had tried his best, and his heart was clear. All right. Suli nodded lightly. She didn't want to fight in public. It was not good for her to expose more tricks. "Senior, this way please." First Elder was pleasantly surprised. He directly pressed the core of the matrix plate, regardless of the holy tactical matrix that was half open. In an instant, a huge shadow of a golden book emerged from the ground and wrapped Su Li and Ning Dawei in it. Ha 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 ha. Ning Dawei couldn't help laughing when he saw Su Li waiting for the big tactical matrix to close obediently. She really wanted to see the holy tactical matrix. Scoundrel, how dare you break into the big tactical matrix of the Ming sect? Today, I will let you know that even a practitioner of Yuanying realm is just a nonentity in the real power of the holy tactical matrix of the Ming sect. After that, he pointed at the matrix plate and shouted, "Turn the characters into swords. Go." As the command of the matrix plate was issued, the golden characters on the shadow of the book immediately left the page and turned into small golden swords, shooting at Su Li's vital parts. Su Li showed some interest. She waved her palm to set a genuine energy shield several inches thick, and then stretched out one hand from the genuine energy shield to grab the small golden swords. "How arrogant you are. You dare to catch the golden swords transformed by the holy tactical matrix with your mortal body?" Ning Dawei couldn't help but ridicule her. But the next scene made him hold back all his laughter. He was so shocked that his eyeballs almost popped out. There was a puffing sound in the center of the book tactical matrix. Almost all the flying swords were stuck in the genuine energy shield, as if they were stuck in a swamp, unable to move. One of the small swords was restrained by Su Li's 2 fingers, motionless. What? She really caught it. Ning Dawei was so shocked that he almost let go of the matrix plate. What kind of monster is she? Catching the holy swords with bare hands, and the genuine energy shield several inches thick. Wait, genuine energy shield? She is actually in Zhuji realm. Ning Dawei was almost completely dumbfounded by this series of shock, but Su Li frowned slightly at this moment. She let go of the golden sword and took back her hand. There was a little red on her fingers. It can actually hurt me. This tactical matrix is really extraordinary, but that's all. Su Li murmured softly, with a little disappointment in her eyes. She urgently needed to confirm her own cultivation, but the so-called book tactical matrix obviously didn't meet the standard she wanted. Forget it. There are many opportunities. It's no big deal to take some risks. While shaking her head, Su Li flashed to the front of Ning Dawei like a ghost and reached out to grab the matrix plate. So fast, Ning Dawei was frightened. In the crisis of life and death, he was unusually calm and directly crushed the matrix plate. He looked ferocious and crazy, grand elder of an eye sect. You forced me to do this. Sixfold holy realm. Show me. As soon as he finished speaking, the matrix plate in Ning Dawei's hand shattered by itself, and he kept vomiting blood. His pneuma instantly became so weak that it could hardly be sensed. He fell to the ground, and his face was as pale as paper. Looking at Su Li in front of him, he laughed nervously in a low voice, regardless of the sequela caused by using the forbidden skill. Even if you are a monster, so what? You will still die in my hands. As he laughed, he cried again. At first, he sobbed in a low voice, and soon he burst into tears. The price of using the sixfold holy realm was his lifespan. He couldn't live long. Su Li glanced at the healed wound on her fingertips, and then glanced around with a faint vigilance in her eyes. This book tactical matrix was a little different. She probed with her psychic awareness and found nothing. She couldn't help but take a breath and pondered. Psychic awareness doesn't work. Is the sixfold holy realm a maze? While she was thinking, a golden light appeared without warning and shot to Su Li's chest faster than lightning. I can't dodge it. Su Li's pupil shrank suddenly, and she only had time to avoid the vital parts. Swish! The golden light flashed, and Su Li groaned. A hole was pierced through her shoulder. In the blink of an eye, the white clothes on her right shoulder were dyed blood red. Even my genuine energy can't resist it. What kind of power is this? While shrinking the wound to stop the bleeding, Su Li became more vigilant and observed the surroundings. But the golden light seemed to have a spirit, and it directly appeared behind Su Li next time. Although Su Li wanted to dodge, she couldn't keep up with her reaction speed, and she was still hurt. This time, it was her right arm. After several times, Su Li's whole body was stained with blood, and the power emitted a sharp characteristic. No wound could be completely stopped bleeding. Su Li's face was a little pale, but her eyes were still terrifyingly calm, as if she wasn't the one who was hurt. This kind of power is very strange. I haven't touched it in my previous life or now, so I can't understand it. Her eyes were full of thoughts. After a short contact with the golden light, she finally understood it. But she still couldn't figure out the nature and origin of this power. She thought for a moment and passed this understanding to Black Lotus. The next moment, Black Lotus suddenly shouted, "Little Su Li, how did you provoke this thing?" Weighing the dark golden book in her hand, Su Li's eyes flashed a trace of strangeness. The feeling of being connected by blood? This magic treasure has recognized me as its master? She didn't use any blood sacrifice spell, and she couldn't find the main body of the magic circle under such circumstances. How did this magic treasure recognize her as its master? Black Lotus, you clearly said that concepts are extremely difficult to break, but why is it like this now? Su Li asked softly, and then she heard a sigh from Black Lotus Ring, who said weakly, "Master, you are so smart. You should have guessed the reason, right?" Su Li was stunned for a moment and blinked. "I want to hear it from you." This was the first time that Black Lotus was willing to call her master, and he even learned to flatter her. Was it just because he saw the power in her blood? Hearing Su Li's reply, Black Lotus immediately became sad and angry, and said madly, "Little Su Li, you are so cruel. Do you know how horrible the talent you have awakened is? It is the legendary talent of the Ghost Clan. It is possible to awaken this talent in every generation of the body of evil ghost, but no one has awakened it since the ancient cultivation era. Talent? Su Li spread out her hands, and her eyes seemed to penetrate the skin and see the blood flowing in her body. Is this a talent? Yes. Black Lotus's tone became cautious. This talent is called blood poison. Although the name is simple, its function is very horrible, and it has all kinds of unpredictable characteristics. For example, little Su Li, your blood poison can erode the core of any tactical matrix and seize control. If nothing goes wrong with this talent, as your cultivation level increases, more unpredictable effects will appear, and the toxicity will become stronger and stronger. This is the real horror of blood poison. Su Li listened and clenched her hands. Blood poison. What was flowing in her body now was such a vicious thing, and she didn't feel when this talent was awakened. If I guess right, your talent has been awakened when you broke through the Zhuji realm, but it is invisible. If you are not injured, it is difficult to find. Black Lotus speculated and continued. When I just had spiritual wisdom, I had seen this kind of talent in the ancient records of the Ghost Clan. It is said that there was a generation of body of evil ghost who awakened blood poison. If he shed a drop of blood, he could poison 10,000 people to death. The 10,000 people here are not ordinary mortals, but practitioners with the same strength as him. Black Lotus's tone was cold. A successful body of evil ghost has an extremely powerful ability to produce blood. His blood is enough to kill all the practitioners of the same generation in Qingshui Circle. This horrible talent finally disappeared because the body of evil ghost was too arrogant and was suppressed by a powerful figure. However, blood poison has also become a talent that the Ghost Clan yearns for and fears. Hearing this, Su Li was enlightened and said softly, "So, my talent is the same as the body of evil ghost, and I can't mention it to anyone?" "No." Black Lotus was extremely serious and said in a deep voice, "Little Su Li, you have to remember that even if your body of evil ghost is exposed, you can't tell anyone about your talent of blood poison. If someone finds it, kill them immediately. This is a taboo that is more frightening than the body of evil ghost. Be careful." Hearing this, Su Li shook her head and smiled. Perhaps there were too many things to hide. At this moment, she didn't feel much even if there was one more. Today, her mentality had changed a lot compared with when she just recovered her memory. The natural law is changeable. Now my fate is not in the natural law. Anyway, I have to go on this path I have chosen. When Su Li put on a new white dress and walked out of the palace in the back mountain, the glimmer of dawn happened to shine. It turned out that she had stayed in the tactical matrix for a day and a night unknowingly. The elders who were waiting in front of the main hall had apprehensive expressions on their faces. Looking at the person who walked out from the golden light of dawn, all the elders' expressions changed dramatically and their hearts sank rapidly. Thud, thud, thud. Su Li walked unhurriedly. The sound of her footsteps seemed to knock on everyone's heart, causing them to step back together until there was no way to retreat. Su Li glanced around and didn't see Qing Weiwei, but she didn't care. She turned over her palm, and a dim golden book appeared. She said lightly, "The first elder of Meng's sect failed to make peace with me and wanted to kill me. He has been executed. Do you want to follow in his footsteps?" This is the holy tactical matrix of the sect. The holy tactical matrix of the sect has been broken. Even the holy tactical matrix has fallen into their hands. What are we? Recognizing the magic treasure in Su Li's hand, the elders who were still hesitating directly knelt down and shouted in unison, "Greetings, Grand Elder! Greetings, Grand Elder! Greetings, Grand Elder! Grand Elder! You will bring us to the peak." Looking at a group of fence-sitters constantly kowtowing in front of her, Su Li squinted her eyes and chuckled in a low voice. In the face of true power, all conspiracies and schemes would be futile. This was the supreme law of the cultivation circle. Qing Weiwei, who was imprisoned in a hall in the back mountain, couldn't help but sigh when he heard those neat shouts. Meng's sect can't be saved after all. He sighed, but there was not much regret in his heart. Instead of falling into the ruthless Su family, it was the best choice to integrate with Ni's sect to protect himself. It depended on how big the ambition of the Grand Elder of an I sect was. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but remember the scene when he mistakenly recognized Suli as a new disciple a few days ago. He couldn't help but feel a little strange. So the Grand Elder, maybe, it was also a new opportunity for him. A few hours later, all disciples were called to wait in front of the palace in the back mountain, including Qingwei. It was rare for all the elders of the sect to gather together. They discussed in private and felt uneasy. They didn't know what the new master of Ming's sect wanted to do. Qingwei stood among them and felt relaxed. He vaguely guessed Su Li's purpose. Soon, two elders walked out of the palace. Their faces were extremely pale, but they were not injured. Ninth Elder, 10th Elder, you were in there? What did the Grand Elder say to you? The one who spoke was a benevolent old man with a bent back. His cultivation was not simple. He had reached the peak of Jindan realm. Qing Weiyue's eyes darkened when he saw him, and he sneered in his heart. He was the second elder of Ming's sect, Pang Yueling. After Ning Daoi's death, he immediately became active. Unfortunately, his tricks were not enough for the new Grand Elder. When 9th Elder and 10th Elder saw Pang Yueling, they forced a smile. When they were about to speak, they suddenly thought of something. Their faces changed, and they left in a hurry without saying anything. Pang Yueling's smile froze on his face, but he returned to normal in an instant. When he glanced around, he saw Qing Weiyue standing in the crowd. He was about to approach him, but a calm voice came from the palace at this time. Elder Qing Weiyue, come in. Pang Yueling's footsteps stopped abruptly. Qing Weiyue looked at him and showed a meaningful smile. Then he turned around and stepped into the door without looking back. Being ignored twice in a row, Pang Yueling couldn't keep a straight face anymore. Looking at the closed door of the palace, his expression was gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. When Qing Weiyue stepped into the palace, the light dimmed a little. He immediately saw Su Li sitting on the throne in the hall with her right arm supporting her chin. She was resting with her eyes closed. As Qing Weiyue walked to the throne, Su Li opened her eyes and said softly, Elder Qing, you are a smart person. You should know what I want you to do. Chapter 405. Qing Weiyue bowed respectfully and then raised his head. He said in a clear voice, I didn't know it before. But after thinking about it, Grand Elder, you had several opportunities to destroy us, but you chose to do it in the back mountain, which didn't affect the operation of the sect. You probably wanted to take Ming's sect for your own use. Then, he put his right fist on his chest and lowered his head. If Grand Elder doesn't think Weiyue is weak, I'm willing to work for you. Oh? Su Li changed her sitting posture and leaned lazily on the throne. She said with a faint smile, I heard from the two just now that the Lord of the Ming sect saved your life. After I take control of the sect, the name of the Ming sect will no longer exist. Don't you want to take revenge on me? Qing Weiyue felt cold all over and said with a bitter smile, Grand Elder, to tell you the truth, after the Lord disappeared, I didn't have a good time in the sect. After hundreds of years, my sense of belonging has almost been consumed. If you didn't show up, I would have planned to find another way out. Cooperating with the Su family is tantamount to digging my own grave. Su Li squinted her eyes slightly. She could hear that Qing Weiyue was telling the truth. You know the nature of the Su family. Thinking of the past, Su Li looked a little cold. Qing Weiyue didn't notice it. He just said honestly, I suffered losses in the hands of the Su family. My life is in danger because of them. No wonder. Su Li nodded slightly and knocked on the throne with her knuckles. She said slowly, then do you know the specific cooperation between the Su family and Ming sect this time? Hearing this, Qing Weiyue finally breathed a sigh of relief and thought that the new Grand Elder was really spying on the Su family. He was very happy to see that Su Li was the enemy of the Su family. After all, it was impossible for him to take revenge by himself. But now, he saw a glimmer of hope. Ning Dawei was on guard against me. Although he once told me about the cooperation with the Su family, he didn't tell me the details because of my strong opposition. Now Ning Dawei is dead. If Grand Elder wants to know, you can ask the second elder, Pang Yueling. He is the one who knows the plan best besides the first elder. Qing Weiwei gave up Peng Yueling without hesitation and added, "Now Peng Yueling is outside the door." Su Li nodded gently. What Qing Weiwei said was the same as what those two people said before. But he said it willingly, while those two people didn't want to, so she used some means. After thinking for a moment, Su Li looked straight at Qing Weiwei. She stared at Qing Weiwei until the latter got goosebumps all over. Then she said with a chuckle, "Qing Weiwei, you want to take revenge on the Su family by my hand. Then, you can't follow me just because you say so. How about I let you deal with Peng Yueling?" Qing Weiwei's expression slightly changed. After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and nodded. If he wanted something, he naturally had to pay the price. He understood this principle. "Very well, I hope you can give me a satisfactory answer." Seeing Qing Weiwei nodded, Su Li smiled even more. She flicked her fingers, and the pocket-sized golden book flew to Qing Weiwei. When Qing Weiwei was in doubt, he heard the voice from the throne. "I lend this to you first, and you can easily deal with the second elder. Go ahead." Qing Weiwei was slightly shocked and subconsciously put down the golden book. He was still a little confused. The six-fold holy tactical matrix of Ming's sect really recognized her as its owner. It is clearly the Lord's thing, and Ning Dawei just borrowed it. How could it be possible? While his mind was in a mess, Qing Weiwei knew there was no way back. He put away the golden book bag, saluted Su Li, and went out without saying anything. After a while, there was a noise of chaos outside the door, but soon it subsided. Su Li narrowed her eyes, and then she immersed herself in refining Zhonglei's cave. During the 1 year's retreat, she didn't have time to refine the cave, and this matter should also be put on the agenda. If she could release Dongfang Wuxue as soon as possible, she would have one more reliable helper. Only 2 days later, Qing Weiwei returned to the hall. There was an unconcealable tiredness in his eyes, but his eyes were extremely bright, as if he had completed a transformation in these 2 days. Sitting on the throne, Su Li slowly opened her eyes and said, "You didn't stay in Meng's sect for hundreds of years in vain." Hearing this, Qing Weiwei was shocked, and his impetuous heart because of unifying Meng's sect completely calmed down. He was not the only elder who had been excluded in Meng's sect for hundreds of years, so he also secretly drew over many forces. This time, with Su Li as his backer, his force surfaced, and it was easy to change the regime of Meng's sect without letting any news leak out. However, he was very clear about the premise of all this, so after calming down, he quickly adjusted his mentality and respectfully said, "Grand Elder, you flatter me. If I don't even have this little strength, how dare I recommend myself? Whether in I sect or Ming sect, they are all forces under the control of the Grand Elder, and I just manage them on behalf of the Grand Elder. You don't have to say this to me." Su Li slightly raised her eyes, and her eyes flashed with intimidating light. "As long as you can work for me at a specific time, it is okay to let you be the Lord of Ming's sect. How about the investigation of the Su family?" Qing Weiwei's heart suddenly beat faster, but he forced himself to calm down and respectfully said, "Peng Yueling didn't want to say it at first, but he couldn't hold on for 2 days under my means." Speaking of this, Qing Weiwei paused, seeming to sort out his thoughts. After a moment, he continued, "Ning Dawei only belongs to the 7th branch of the Su family as the representative of Ming's sect, and there is no substantial transaction for the time being. But half a month later, the 7th branch will re-establish the 7th Miss Su, and will hold a promotion banquet in Iyun Yard. At that time, all the sects that belong to the 7th branch will be present." Qing Weiwei frowned. "At that time, I am afraid that the Su family will gather all the forces to discuss how to deal with us." Su Li was calm and lightly snorted. "The Su family always likes to kill people with a borrowed knife and is never willing to take risks in person. I think I scared the butler in front of the sect last time, but it doesn't matter. Let's go and listen to it together." "What? Let's go and listen to it together." Qing Weiwei's eyes widened, and he couldn't understand it for a while. Su Li's eyes curved, and she chuckled. "Hasn't Ming's sect surrendered to the Su family? Then why not you go to the promotion banquet?" "Grand Elder, you mean Qing Weiwei realized it. He opened his mouth, but felt thirsty and didn't know what to say. It was too risky for them to break into the dragon's pool and the tiger's den. You are Qing Weiwei of Ming's sect, not mine. I have tried my best to cover up the process of the change of head of Ming's sect. Don't let me down. Su Li's indifferent voice echoed in his ears, and Qing Weiwei suddenly felt cold in his heart. It turned out that the reason why the Grand Elder went to the back mountain to fight with Ning Dawei was not to preserve Ming's sect completely, but because of this. She has long guessed the movement of the Su family. It's really terrible that a person's mind and vision can be so far-sighted. Qing Weiwei's forehead was slightly sweating, and he didn't have any strange thoughts in his heart. He respectfully said yes and left the hall, and began to prepare for the trip to Iyun Yard. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, Yanzai received a message from Su Li, and secretly came to Ming's sect to temporarily take the position of Qing Weiwei. With the fierce reputation of immortal Bingshu, even if they knew that Qing Weiwei was about to leave the sect with Su Li, no one dared to do anything. It's almost time. Looking at the sky, Su Li stepped on the end of Qing Weiwei's flying sword and turned to look at Yanzai. Yanzai was instantly refreshed, nodded slightly, and transmitted the sound. Don't worry, Master. I will keep a close eye on Ming's sect, and no information will be leaked. Su Li's cold eyebrows and eyes were slightly soft. She nodded slightly and took back her eyes. Seeing this, Qing Weiwei thought of something, and the flying sword under his feet immediately rushed to the sky with a whoosh and disappeared in the sky after a few breaths. Yanzai looked up at the sky and slowly breathed out a foul breath. Everything is difficult at the beginning. Master, be careful. At the same time, Iyun Yard was decorated with lanterns and colored banners, and the busy figures of servants in the yard kept shuttling back and forth. Only a room in the depth of the yard was quite deserted. In front of the room, 2 servants in stewards' clothes were whispering, and their expressions were quite weird. I didn't expect that the 7th miss should be Su Yusheng. Yes, is the owner crazy? How can a person whose soul has been polluted by the rebirth realm be the outstanding miss of our Su family? It is said that Miss Su Zini died in a hurry, and the owner of the house is desperate for the selection of talents. But it is too absurd. He didn't think about how much trouble the second holy girl of Yushu sect made, and now, Before the 2 stewards finished their words, a cold snort suddenly came into their ears, and the 2 were so scared that their faces turned pale, and they didn't dare to speak. In the room, Su Yusheng quietly looked at herself in the mirror, dressed up, and looked at the angry little maid beside her. She couldn't help but laugh. Xiaoyu, why do you care about these servants? Xiaoyu, with 2 small buns of hair, turned around, stamped her feet, and pouted. Miss, I just can't stand it. You are clearly sober, and your strength is absolutely not worse than any miss of the Su family. How can you follow that lunatic? Xiaoyu. Su Yusheng's face became cold, and Xiaoyu knew that she said something wrong. She immediately stuck out her tongue. In short, you absolutely deserve to be the 7th miss of the Su family. Su Zini doesn't even deserve to carry shoes for you. Su Yusheng shook her head and said nothing, looking at herself in the mirror quietly. Was she crazy? Maybe all the people who had entered the rebirth realm were crazy. She couldn't tell whether she was the miss of the Su family or the sister of that person, and in her heart, she was more inclined to the latter. She had no reason to be reluctant to leave the cold Su family, which only cared about profits. Although we are not in the same era, my sister seems to be born in the Su family in her early years, and then went to Yushu sect. But why? I can't find any trace of her living in the Su family in the past 1,000 years. Thinking of this, Su Yusheng sighed softly. Maybe when she became the 7th miss of the Su family, she could find more clues. Sister. Chapter 406. At sunset, there were more and more people in Iyun Yard. The power of the 7 branches of Su family was not worse than any of the 25 sects, even more. When the news of the promotion banquet of the 7th miss came out, countless small forces and sects came to congratulate. There was no accident this time. When Qing Weiwei took Su Li to land not far from the yard, he saw a long queue at the gate. Grand Elder, how can we get in? Qing Weiwei was calm on the surface when he came to the enemy's territory, but he couldn't help being nervous. Su Li looked at the vicissitudes of Yun Yard. Hearing Qing Weiwei's transmitted sound, she smiled slightly, and her gentle and calm voice sounded in Qing Weiwei's mind. Remember, if you want to deceive others, you have to deceive yourself first. Do you understand? Su Li's voice seemed to have a strange power, which calmed Qing Weiwei down. He thought about Su Li's words and nodded thoughtfully. Now that you understand, let's go in. Su Li put a gentle force on Qing Weiwei's back, which immediately made him stagger and pass the queue. For a moment, all the representatives of small forces who were lining up to enter the yard looked at him. Feeling so many eyes, Qing Weiwei couldn't help but feel numb. He smiled bitterly in his heart and strode to the gate of the yard. At this moment, although he was still a little perturbed, he had already understood Su Li's words. After coming up with a plan in his mind, he changed his gentle expression and slightly raised his head. The arrogance that emanated from him actually caused many of the representatives of the small forces to not dare to look directly at him. Which big force comes to congratulate us? Why is he so unfamiliar? He must be one of the top forces in the 25 sections. No wonder he dares to cut the queue. Nonsense. The people of the 25 sects don't need to line up. When can I join the 25 sects? When people were talking about it, Qing Weiwei took Su Li to the doorman and said proudly, I'm the representative of Meng sect. It's very important for us to come here. Let us in. The doorman thought Qing Weiwei had a great background, but when he heard it was Meng sect, his face suddenly became sullen. After a moment, he silently stepped aside and said, Please. Qing Weiwei laughed and strode into the yard with Su Li. Why? Does the Meng sect have a great background? Another doorman couldn't help but ask. The gloomy doorman sneered and said, How is that possible? He's just a sesame-sized sect, and he's already overestimating himself just because he wants to climb up to our 7th branch. I've seen many people like him, and there will be plenty of opportunities to deal with him in the future. The other doorman nodded as if he understood. He wondered when he could reach the level of the old doorman. Of course, the conversation between the doormen could not be heard by Qing Weiwei. At this moment, he took Su Li to the quiet and secluded courtyard and breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he felt his back was wet. Taking a breath, Qing Weiwei felt an indescribable excitement from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't help clenching his fists. I have never done such an exciting thing in my life. Thinking of this, he looked at Su Li, who was looking around without much expression as usual. Suddenly, he felt the gap in their realms. Was she an evildoer? At this time, Su Li pointed to the front and said lightly, The layout of Yun Yard is symmetrical. It's square, and the biggest courtyard in the middle is the place where the promotion ceremony is held. You can get in touch with the person in charge of the 7th branch when you go there. I don't need to remind you what to do next. Qing Weiwei came to his sense and was stunned. After nodding subconsciously, he came to himself and asked repeatedly, Alone? Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows. Do you want me to accompany you? Qing Weiwei shuddered and said no repeatedly. Then he hesitated and said, But the courtyard is heavily guarded. It's not something you need to care about. Su Li turned around and waved her hand. Let's go. In the blink of an eye, she turned into the dimly lit path and disappeared. Yes, the Grand Elder is omnipotent. The guard of the yard is nothing to her. Qing Weiwei figured it out and became spirited. He raised his head and left in the direction pointed by Su Li. He still had a tough battle to fight. Deep in the yard, there were intricate passages. Su Li walked on one of the paths. The stone road was wet with evening dew. Her eyes flashed and looked at the winding path in the distance. From Qing Weiwei, she knew that Yun Yard had been an important place for holding promotion banquets for thousands of years. But Yun Yard was not as luxurious or geographical location as any other yard of the 7th branch of Su family. It was still a mystery why the Su family set it as an important place to entertain guests. After a while, a wall appeared in front of Su Li. It seemed that she had reached the end of the road. Her eyes flashed. She plucked a willow leaf and shot it at random with her fingers. It nailed into a spot on the white wall. The old and decaying wall immediately rippled, and then quietly dispersed, revealing its original appearance. Behind the arched wall door, there was a long-abandoned farmhouse. There was only a small hut in the yard, a square stone table, a small vegetable field, and a stone well for daily meals. It turned out that the wall was just a magic matrix. Seeing the small yard, Suli chuckled and walked into the small yard. She used a spell to clear the dust on the ground. Sitting beside the small stone table in the yard, she looked nostalgic. It has been so many years. I didn't expect that no one had found it. Suli glanced at the yard and suddenly fixed her eyes. She gently pushed the door open, and the smell of decay came to her face. The furnishings in the house were simple. There was nothing except a pair of tables used for memorial services. Although the 2 tablets on the table were made of excellent materials, they couldn't stand the decay of time. The characters were so modeled that they couldn't be seen clearly. But Suli still remembered the names of the 2 people. Su Chui and Su Erniu were both servant names randomly chosen by the Su family. Suli smiled. Now she thought that if she was really the biological daughter of the 2 people, her name would probably be like Su Xiaohong. Why didn't she notice such a big flaw? Was she really stupid in the previous life? Suli seriously thought about this question, and the answer was probably that she didn't want to think too much. Adoptive father, adoptive mother. After 1,000 years, I'm back again. Suli softly murmured. She touched the universe ring with her finger, took out the new tablets and burning incense, and put them in. Then she bowed 3 times. 1,000 years ago, she was about to open the reincarnation mirror and came back secretly once. Iyun Yard had always been her private yard. This was a tacit agreement between her and the 7th branch of the Su family. However, following her death, this agreement was abandoned like a pair of worn-out shoes. Not only that, the 7th branch of the Su family seemed to be proud of this and used her small yard as an important banquet venue. After I die, do you still want to take advantage of me? Su Li's smile became cold, and her eyes flashed with cold light. No one knew what she was thinking. An hour later, Su Li personally cleaned the house and repaired the small vegetable garden. Then she left the small yard and closed the door again. This time, she had a lot of insights in matrix circle cultivation, which was close to the level of the 10th grade of Grandmaster. There were no more than 3 people in the entire Juzhou region who could open this yard. Maybe the next time she came here would be many years later. Chapter 407. On the quiet path, Suli saw that the gate of the courtyard was completely covered by the tactical matrix and finally restored to its original appearance. Then she turned around and was about to leave. Suddenly, a burst of footsteps mixed with a man's voice came. In the farther place, there was a light and almost inaudible footstep. 2 groups of people? Suli fixed her eyes and didn't avoid them. She waited for them quietly. Not long after, 2 young men in the costumes of the Su family came side by side. They seemed to be in their 20s. Their faces were pink and white, their feet were weak, and they smelled of alcohol. Suli frowned. She thought that she could test them, but she didn't expect that they were just 2 idiots. She turned around and was about to leave. The 2 childs of the Su family were lustful. Seeing Su Li's petite and lovely appearance, they didn't want to let her go. After seeing her move, they immediately rushed to stop in front of Su Li. One of the long-faced young men smiled and pretended to be surprised. Oh, whose sister is she? She is so beautiful. Why don't you go to the central hall? Instead, you come to such a remote place. Are you lost? Su Li didn't speak. The obscure pneuma that she had sensed before was not far behind the 2. Seeing this, the other slightly shorter young man couldn't restrain himself. He leaned over and said with his eyes glowing, "Little beauty, it's fate that we can meet here. Why don't you let us send you off?" Hey, the wonderful taste of being a woman. Little beauty, you must have not tasted it. Before they finished their words, the 2 men were tempted. They didn't give way and directly rushed to Su Li's body. Su Li shook her head and took a step back gently. The two men failed to rush and staggered. If they didn't have a little cultivation, they would have fallen down. Presumptuous. You are just a maid. You dare to refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. I will let you taste my power. The two young men were full of alcohol. Their faces were full of lust. They suddenly became angry out of shame and waved their hands to slap Su Li's cheek. Stop! At this moment, a clear shout came from behind the two men, followed by two fierce palm winds, which slapped their backs fiercely. Ah! Ah! The two idiots screamed miserably as they were sent flying. They crawled for a long time before they could get up. After they stood up, they saw the silhouette of the person's swaying footsteps. Their half-sobered wine immediately evaporated. 777. The long-faced young man's eyes widened, and he stuttered for a long time without calling out the person's complete name. In the end, due to excessive fear, her eyes rolled back and she fainted in happiness. The short young man wanted to cry but had no tears. He knelt down in a cowardly manner and said in a panic, "Seventh miss, please spare my life. This disciple drank too much." Normally, this disciple would never bully men or rape women. Su Yoshing's cold eyes were full of anger. She snorted and waved her sleeves, saying, "Take them away and hand them over to the torture room for investigation. If they have bad behavior, punish them to the chores room for a good education." "No, spare me, seventh young lady, spare me." The short young man felt dizzy and immediately begged for mercy. But until he was dragged away by the steward and his voice disappeared in the courtyard, Su Yoshing's expression did not soften at all. The face of the Su family is really lost by this kind of person. Xiaoyu, who served on the side, said angrily. Su Yoshing's beautiful eyes flashed a trace of helplessness when she heard that. She knew how dirty the Su family was, but it was a pity that she couldn't change all this with her strength. Sighing softly, Su Yoshing walked to Su Li and squatted down. Looking at the cold expression on the delicate and tender face, which was completely different from that of the girls of the same age, she couldn't help but be curious. However, she had seen people who were born indifferent. She didn't think too much at the moment and just comforted her in a warm voice. "Sorry, little sister. I scared you. What's your name?" Su Li was silent, looking at the familiar face in front of her. A trace of imperceptible light flashed through her pupils. Although it was different from her childhood, she still recognized it. Fifth sister. Su Yoshing didn't know what was going on. She thought that Su Li was too scared to speak, so she wanted to comfort her again. At this time, she suddenly saw Su Li look up behind her, and then slowly said, "Are you Su Yoshing?" "Huh." Su Yoshing was stunned and frowned slightly. She hesitated and said, "Do you know me?" She had hardly gone out in the past 1,000 years. Although the tone of the little girl in front of her was very mature, she was clearly more than 10 years old, and her bone age was less than 100 years old. What was going on? Su Yoshing was still shocked and doubtful. Suddenly, she saw Su Li's lips curled up. The familiar curve made her heart beat faster. "My name is Su Li, fifth sister. 1,000 years is not a long time. Don't you know me now?" Su Li smiled indifferently. "Then I will be sad." At this moment, Su Yoshing was completely stunned and speechless for a long time. Sister? Was it really my sister? All kinds of scenes in the illusion flashed in front of her eyes. From the childhood to the disheveled child, even if it was only 4 or 5 years, she enjoyed the love from her sister every moment in those years. Even when she returned to Qingshui Circle, all the memories came back, and the memory of that life became clearer. In the illusion that no one remembered the past, she was abandoned as soon as she was born. Her father didn't love her, and her mother didn't love her. They all regarded her as a burden. Su Yoshing didn't understand the hidden meaning in Su Li's words. She nodded solemnly. "Sister, I will try my best." Starting from the 7th miss. A moment later, Su Yoshing personally escorted Su Li to an inaccessible place outside Yun Yard, and then returned. Su Li looked at her back, with extreme warmth and absolute calmness in her eyes. "Shang, I hope you are not on the wrong side. While whispering to himself, Black Lotus ring appeared between his fingers. He tooted and said, Little Suli, I think that girl is sincere to you. Aren't you afraid that she will be disappointed if she knows it later? Maybe she will be disappointed, and I will make it up to her. Suli rubbed the lotus surface of Black Lotus ring with her fingertips, and her eyes were gloomy. But in this life, I can't make any mistakes. Black Lotus was stunned and couldn't help but be speechless. That's true. At this moment, in the atrium of Iyun Yard, Qing Weiyue sat in the guest seat, drinking and watching the elders of Su family coming and going around. After the initial uneasiness faded, he now hoped to get in touch with Su family as soon as possible and finish the task Su Li gave him. Coming, coming, coming. The new seventh miss is coming. After 3 rounds of drinking, Qing Weiyue finally saw Su Yusheng. Of course, he didn't know the relationship between his grand elder and Su Yusheng. He just sighed in his heart and envied the talent. Then he calmed down and continued to wait for the call from the seniors of Su family. Come on, let's have a toast to 7th Miss Su Yusheng. Cheers! Congratulations to Miss Su Yusheng for her good fortune from now on, and her cultivation road is unimpeded. Cheers! Thank you so much, fellow practitioners, Su Yusheng said with a smile, but she was still thinking about where Su Li was at the moment. Fortunately, there was no substantive content in this promotion banquet, and no one made trouble. Soon it was over, and she could leave in advance. At the same time, Qing Weiyue finally saw an elder of Su family with 3 pairs of suns and moons embroidered on his chest coming to him. Are you Ning Dawei, who came to discuss something important with Ming sect? Chapter 408. Qing Weiyue's heart tightened, but he smiled and stood up with hands folded. I'm Qing Weiyue of Ming sect. Nice to meet you, elder of Su family. Hearing that, the elder frowned at once. Seeing that, Qing Weiyue said again, I heard that the more patterns of the sun and moon on the chest of an elder of the Su family, the more honorable his status is. You must be highly respected in the Su family. I'm deeply honored. The compliment made the elder of Su family very happy, and his eyebrows relaxed. He said slowly, I'm Su Mingqing, the 7th branch of Su family. Qing Weiyue was surprised. You are 2nd elder Su Mingqing. I've heard a lot about you. As soon as he said that, Su Mingqing's expression became even more relaxed. He chuckled and said, It's just an empty reputation. Come with me. Yes, sir. Qing Weiyue followed him immediately and felt relieved. He didn't expect that it was so easy to fool him, but he also understood that Ming sect was just a small role for Su family. As long as the person could explain the situation of an I sect, it didn't matter who came. In their eyes, Ning Dawei and I are just non-entities. While mocking himself, Qing Weiyue followed Su Mingqing through the room to the south of the central hall and came to the assembly hall at the back of Iyun Yard. Stepping into the hall, the noise faded away and was replaced by silence. Qing Weiyue's eyes flashed, and he saw the talisman of the soundproof tactical matrix engraved on the doorframe. He glanced around the hall quietly and saw many lords and elders of small sects sitting in it. He quickly sorted out his thoughts in his mind. After checking everything, he was slightly relaxed. After some polite greetings with Su Mingqing, he chose a seat and sat down, waiting. On the other side, Su Mingqing came to the side hall, and the smile on his face disappeared immediately. What's wrong, Mingqing? In the side hall, a well-dressed middle-aged practitioner with a proud and dignified demeanor came. He seemed to be in his 30s, but his real age was over 2,000 years old. Su Mingqing came to himself and saw the middle-aged man whose pneuma was as unfathomable as a deep pool. He quickly bowed and saluted head. This person was the controller of the 7th branch of Su family, Su Yuanhai. In those days, Su Yuanhai was also the top talent of Su family. After 2,000 years of ups and downs, the power of Su family finally fell into his hands hundreds of years ago. You don't look right. What happened? Su Yuanhai came over. Although he looked peaceful, he gave Su Mingqing a strong sense of oppression. Su Mingqing lowered his head subconsciously and said, It's a little weird. It was Ning Dawei who contacted us before and promised that he would come to discuss how to deal with an sect. But this time, it was not Ning Dawei, but an elder named Qing Weiyue. Su Yuanhai remained calm and waved his hand gently. A cold young man in black immediately came out from the side hall. People from the main house's dark hall. Su Mingqing's pupil shrank. The indifferent young man had come close and bowed to Su Yuanhai without saying anything. Su Yuanhai also knew the temperament of the young man, so he asked directly, "Is there anything unusual in Ming's sect recently? Do you know a man named Qing Weiyue?" "Lord, please wait a moment," the young man in black said lightly. He quickly took out a carrier rune and finished inscribing it. Then he waved his hand and injected spiritual power into it. The carrier rune immediately disappeared into the nothingness. Only 10 minutes later, another carrier rune escaped from the nothingness. The indifferent young man handed it to Su Yuanhai without looking at it and turned away. Su Mingqing was a little embarrassed to see the people from the main house's dark hall being rude to the Lord. Su Yuanhai waved his hand carelessly and threw the carrier rune to Su Mingqing. Su Mingqing scanned it with his divine awareness and suddenly said in surprise, "Ning Dawei is dead? Now Qing Weiyue is the new lord? This is also..." Su Yuanhai nodded. Qing Weiyue secretly controlled the weird book matrix of Ming's sect. It is not surprising that Ning Dawei lost to him. But to be cautious, we still need to test him. Did you show any flaws just now? Su Mingqing shook his head quickly. No. In order to numb him, I was even quite friendly to him. If there is any trick, he will definitely give himself away when we test him suddenly. Very well, I will do it myself. The matter of an sect can't be delayed. Su Yuanhai's eyes were deep. If we can't even take down a small force, how can the 7th branch of Su family raise our heads in front of other branches? The night was dark and deep into the night. In the assembly hall, Qing Weiyue, who didn't know the approaching danger, finally saw a group of high-level officials of Su family, headed by Su Yuanhai, coming from the side hall after a long wait. For a moment, the hall, which was full of whispers, suddenly became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Su Yuanhai walked to the seat in the middle and sat down. He laughed loudly and said, "Thank you for coming. Except for the elder of Ming's sect, most of you are old friends. I will make a long story short. Today's late-night meeting is for an sect." As soon as he said this, many people's eyes changed and secretly thought, as expected, the death of Su Zini had been spread. Some people had long guessed that Su family would deal with an sect, and now it came true. But before that, I have a question. Su Yuanhai said this with a smile, and his meaningful eyes fell on Qing Weiyue. In the next moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. Qing Weiyue's heart thumped, and his expression changed slightly, but he was still calm. He stood up and held his hands. "7th Master of Su family, what can I do for you?" "It's fine if you want to teach me." Su Yuanhai's smile faded, "but I am a little curious. Ning Dawei promised to come in person to show his sincerity. Why did an elder come at the last moment? Is my Su family not worth mentioning in the eyes of Ming's sect?" Qing Weiyue's forehead was covered with sweat instantly, and his mind was in a mess. Was he suspected? Or was he really angry at Ming's sect's rudeness? How should he deal with it? Qing Weiyue took a deep breath slowly and recalled what Su Li said in his mind. "Calm down. If you want to deceive others, you have to deceive yourself first, understand?" "Deceive myself? If I were the new lord of Ming's sect, what should I say at this moment?" Qing Weiyue's scattered eyes gradually became spirited. After a few breaths, he suddenly raised his head and stared at Su Yuanhai's eyes, saying in a low voice, "Forgive me, Master Su. Ming's sect did have an accident." "What?" Su Yuanhai raised his eyebrows. "I'd like to hear the details." Qing Weiyue seemed to get into the role, and his body relaxed. He scratched his head and said with embarrassment, "I have always been at odds with Ning Dawei. The accumulated hatred for hundreds of years finally made me unable to bear it, and Ning Dawei. I am not talented, but now I am the new lord of Ming's sect, and I am willing to be an affiliated sect of Su family. I hope Master Su can be generous and forgive me." "I see." Qing Weiyue's words all matched with the information. A trace of doubt in Su Yuanhai's heart faded away, and he asked with interest, "What's your opinion on an sect?" Qing Weiyue's body shook, and he said righteously, "An sect is too ambitious, and the next target is very likely to be Ming's sect. I am willing to do my bit to destroy an sect for master." Ha 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 ha. Your new little old man is interesting. He is calm in the face of danger. He is a talent, but his cultivation is too low. In the tactical matrix for camouflage on the roof of the council hall, Black Lotus couldn't help laughing. Suli also smiled slightly. "I'm also a little surprised. Now I am short of people. As long as he is loyal enough, his cultivation is not a problem." Black Lotus rolled his eyes. "I know you have a lot of celestial stones. Why don't you give some to me?" Suli said with a faint smile, "Lord Black Lotus doesn't care about those celestial stones. It's better to give them to me." "Little Suli, you are a bully. You are not a man." The next morning, the east was bright. Qing Weiyue returned to Ming's sect by riding his sword. Looking at the familiar gate wall of Ming's sect, he was so tired that he couldn't help but feel like he was in a dream. "Come to see me when you are back." Hearing Su Li's familiar voice, Qing Weiyue was slightly refreshed. This was not a dream. He flew and landed in front of the hall in the back mountain of Ming's sect. He pinched a small spell to clean the sweat on his body and tidied his clothes. Then he opened the door and walked in. In the dark hall, there were a few candles. On the throne, there was still a familiar and lazy petite figure. Hearing the voice, she opened her eyes, and her pupils were full of breathtaking luster. "Well done." Hearing the cold voice, Qing Weiyue, who was about to report the matter in detail, was suddenly shocked. She knew? "Of course I know. Do you want me to believe you and let you finish my task only by your words? If so, the world of our cultivation circle is too simple." Hearing Su Li's voice, Qing Weiyue was shocked and broke into a cold sweat. He was glad that he didn't have other thoughts from the beginning. However, at the same time, he couldn't help but feel frightened. The council hall was obviously isolated by a big tactical matrix. The Grand Elder didn't go in, but he knew what happened inside. The so-called supernatural power was nothing more than this. "Well, you are shocked a lot, and you will be rewarded a lot. Let's talk about their plan first." Hearing Su Li's words, Qing Weiyue came to his sense and felt strange. "Since the Grand Elder knows, I want to hear it from your mouth." Su Li interrupted Qing Weiyue, and Qing Weiyue immediately stopped talking. After a while, he told her the plan discussed last night. An hour later, Qing Weiyue walked out of the palace, wiped the cold sweat on his head, and smiled bitterly. But when he saw the universe ring in his hand, he couldn't help but feel excited and left happily. In the hall, Su Li was half lying on the throne, with one hand supporting her earlobe, and the other hand holding the jade slip map left by Qing Weiyue. Her eyes were changing, and her thoughts were tumbling. Songjin Valley? This name is very strange. Does it appear after my death? 3 days. I'd like to see how your Su family will lure me into the trap. Chapter 409. 3 days later, in the hall of the Lord of an Ice sect, Su Li played with the small disc that took her 3 days to refine. Huayan looked at it and was quite worried. She couldn't help but ask, "Li, can this thing really deal with the scheme of the 7th branch of Su family? They have gathered dozens of small sects to ambush you. You have to be careful." "Don't worry." Su Li clenched her fist, put away the disc, and raised her eyes slightly. Huayan couldn't help but look outside. As expected, First Elder just entered the hall. He walked to the center of the hall and saluted. "Grand Elder, Lord, Elder Qing Weiyue of Ming's sect is here to see you. He finally comes." Huayan took a deep breath and said, "Send my order. Let him in." The Great Elder respectfully responded, bowed, and retreated. At this moment, facing an unprecedentedly strong enemy, he was calm and didn't panic when he saw the petite girl sitting on the stage. He didn't need to pretend. He flew to Qing Weiyue, who was still outside the gate of an ice sect, raised his head slightly, and said coldly with a hint of vigilance, "Please come in. Lord is waiting for you in the hall." Qing Weiwei nodded and followed First Elder into an eye sect and disappeared. In Songjin Valley, people of Su family hid in the dark. A water mirror appeared in the nothingness in front of Su Yuanhai and others. The scene of Qing Weiwei entering the gate of an eye sect was shown in the mirror, and even his voice was transmitted. Head, Qing Weiwei was summoned by Lord of an eye sect. It seems that the news that the Grand Elder of an eye sect is practicing in isolation is true. Su Mengqing spoke first. Su Yuanhai nodded and whispered to himself, "In the past year, the disciples of an eye sect have been bullied by Meng's sect, but they have no intention to resist. It must be because their Grand Elder is practicing in isolation and lacks confidence. It's a pity that the Chief Steward and others have been in a coma since they came back, and First Elder is not here at this critical moment. Otherwise, why do we have to mobilize so many people?" Su Mengqing sighed regretfully. Su Yuanhai glanced at him, and then glanced at the purple-robed elder who didn't seem to hear it. He said softly, "We are not at home now." Su Mengqing suddenly woke up and regretted saying the wrong words. But he wondered why the head didn't stop him just now. Haha, it seems that family head Su still has some resentment against my Jinlo group. When Su Mengqing was upset, the old man in the purple robe, who seemed to be unaware of it, suddenly laughed and walked to Su Yuanhai. He continued to say, "The fact that your clan's Grand Elder was able to participate in the restoration of the Great Array is something that many Array masters yearn for. For example, although I participated in the selection back then, I was eliminated because my Array Dao realm was not high enough." Sigh. Su Yuanhai stared at the old man in the purple robe and said slowly, An oppressive pressure spread out. "Array Master Shun, there's no need to say anymore. I've already heard these words countless times, and I'm already tired of hearing them. Now I just want to know, when will the first elder of the 7th branch of our Su family come back from Jinlo group?" No matter how trivial and profound a formation was it really necessary to spend 800 years to repair it? Moreover, all the Matrix Masters in the Jojo region with acceptable realms worked together. Even if it was a 10th grade matrix, it had already been restored. If the soul tablet in the ancestral hall was not broken, Su Yuanhai would have thought that the first elder of the 7th branch had died. "Ho ho, 7th master of the Su family, please be patient." The old man in the purple robe, who was called Array Master Shen, cupped his hands repeatedly and said humbly and sincerely, "In fact, I come to help this time." On the one hand, 7th Master of the Su family asked for help from Jinlo Group, and on the other hand, Jinlo Group also wants me to bring some news to Master to appease your irritation. "Oh?" Su Yuanhai raised his eyebrows. "I'd like to hear the details." Master of the Su family also knows that all the people who went to repair the big matrix have not come back. Array Master Shen lowered his voice, and a wave appeared around him, covering the 3 people. Soundproof Matrix, Su Mengqing, who was standing aside, pricked up his ears slightly. Since Array Master Shen was so cautious, what he said next must be a secret that could not be missed. Yes. Su Yuanhai nodded. But so what? No matter how advanced the 10th grade matrix is, it will never take 800 years. 7th Master of the Su family, you are wrong. Array Master Shen immediately retorted, looking at Su Yuanhai with a serious face and burning eyes. What if the level of the big matrix has already exceeded the 10th grade? Huh. Su Yuanhai's eyes were fixed. Array Master Shen, what do you mean? Array Master Shen's eyes showed a dignified look, and he asked instead of answering, 7th Master of the Su family, you should be familiar with the bloody accident of Samsara, right? Of course, it is a big event that affects the whole Qingshui circle. Anyone in the cultivation circle will know about it. Su Yuanhai said, and suddenly paused with a surprised look. You mean, yes. Array Master Shen's eyes were full of yearning and pity. The big matrix to be repaired is the fragment that fell from the illusion of Samsara. I see. Su Yuanhai exclaimed, and the plain phantom in white involuntarily appeared in his mind. He was more than 2,000 years old now, and was of the same generation as Su Li. And he was also in Ian Yard when he was a child. Brother Yuanhai, thank you for giving me food. Brother Yuan Hai, why you can practice and become strong, but I can't? Brother Yuan Hai, I have no parents. When you become an immortal flying in the sky, take me away from here, okay? Brother Yuan Hai, I am in so much pain. Why did they hurt me? What is in my blood? Su Yuan Hai, it turns out that you are the same as the Su family. I will not return to the Su family in the future. Su Yuan Hai closed his eyes, trying to calm down the emotions in his childhood. Su Mengqing looked at his master strangely and consciously did not disturb him. After a long time, Su Yuan Hai opened his eyes again. His eyes were calm and indifferent. Looking at the water mirror, Su Li and Qing Weiyue flying out of an insect together, he said softly, "It's almost time. Let's get ready." In the air to Cangjin Valley, Su Li followed Qing Weiyue's flying sword. Qing Weiyue scanned around with his psychic awareness and found nothing. He was about to talk to Su Li, but was stopped by a voice in his mind. "Someone has done something to you. Communicate with me by voice transmission." Qing Weiyue was shocked. Someone had done something to him? When? Why didn't he notice it at all? But since Su Li said so, Qing Weiyue naturally believed her. He transmitted the sound. The Su family and all the other sects are in Cangjin Valley. They didn't tell me what tactical matrix they will use to deal with you. Su Li's eyes flickered. Sure enough, they will use tactical matrix. After so many years, Su Guohong, I hope your tactical matrix realm will not let me down. Thinking of this, she turned over her palm, and a massive pneuma flashed in her palm. I didn't expect that the Su family would have such a treasure as the understanding grass. In this way, I can advance the second level of Suayu tactics a lot faster. The bait that Qing Weiyue brought to lure Su Li was undoubtedly the understanding grass. But under the instruction of the Su family, he said that it grew in Cangjin Valley and was guarded by a powerful demon beast. He only had time to intercept a massive pneuma to prove it. As expected, this understanding grass was in the treasury of the 7th branch of the Su family. Su Li's lips curled up, revealing a fascinating smile. Su Yuan Hai, I'm really sorry. Whoosh! 2 arcs crossed the sky and were soon seen by the spies outside Cangjin Valley. They are coming. Matrix Master Shun waved his hand, and his eyes were full of killing intent. He transmitted the sound, "Everyone, get ready." The lords of small sects hiding everywhere stood in the tactical matrix one after another and injected their own strength. The power of dozens of Jindan realm and Yuanying realm condensed together along the runes, just under Su Yuanhai's feet. The terrifying energy was surging obscurely. 7th Master of the Su family, the tactical matrix has been completed. You can use the power of the spirit-absorbing tactical matrix to fight against the enemy at any time. Even a practitioner at the peak of Yuanying realm can't bear the power condensed by dozens of Jindan realm and Yuanying realm. Matrix Master Shun said in a tired voice. After all, he was only a high-grade Matrix Master, not a tactical Matrix Master. It was quite hard for him to set up such a big tactical matrix. Matrix Master Shun, thank you so much. After this is done, I will reward you handsomely. Su Yuanhai stared at the 2 people who were slowly descending from the sky. He glanced over Qing Weiyue and only fixed his eyes on the petite girl with an indifferent face. Now is the time for me to use people. If I remember correctly, there is only one illusionarizing powder left in the warehouse. The last one was used on Su Li, and this one, Su Yuan Hai. Before Su Yuanhai finished his wishful thinking, there was a sudden bang in his mind, like a big bell ringing in his ears. He was so shocked that he bled from his 7 orifices and felt dizzy. Master! Su Mengqing turned pale with fright. I'm fine. Su Yuanhai shook his head fiercely. When he looked up in horror, he found that the person was no longer in the air. His heart suddenly sank. He turned around and found nothing. What are you looking for? A ghost-like blurred figure suddenly appeared beside him, with an indescribable teasing tone. Su Yuanhai's hair stood on end. He turned around and retreated, immediately crushing the switch of the spirit-absorbing tactical matrix in his hand. As he flashed away, a small disc fell into the core of the tactical matrix under his feet. It spun and lay flat. When Array Master Shan saw this item, it was as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes were wide open as he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! Don't start the tactical matrix." Hearing Matrix Master Shan's words, Su Yuanhai looked at his empty hands with a bitter face. It's too late. Boom! A huge roar sounded in the Cangjin Valley. The smoke was so thick that people couldn't see clearly. Pooh! Pooh! Qing Weiwei spat out the soil in his mouth unexpectedly and tried to see the scene in the valley. Finally, he saw the familiar voice of Su Li coming out. Her white clothes were spotless, and there was no trace of fighting on her body. How on earth did she do it? Qing Weiwei increasingly felt that the girl in front of him was unfathomable. Su Li waved her hand, and the strong wind blew away the thick smoke in the valley. The vision gradually became clear. She waved her hand and smiled. It's almost time. Let's see what else the seventh master of the Su family wants to say. Qing Weiwei, an old man, looked at Su Li's beautiful side face in the smoke and was stunned for a moment. Chapter 410. Cough, cough. When Qing Weiwei followed Su Li into Cangjin Valley, he heard an extremely repressed cough. When the smoke and wind dispersed, the scene that entered his eyes caused him to be extremely speechless. The sect masters of the small forces that had been hiding in the valley were all heavily injured and groaning on the ground. Many of them were even covered in blood and had been hit by the boulders that rolled down from the valley, causing them to lose consciousness. Qing Weiwei was surprised and curious when he thought of the small disc that Su Li threw out before. How could such a small object have such great power? At this moment, Su Li stopped in front of an old man in a purple robe who was leaning against a mountain rock. Cough, cough, counter-array disc. Is there really such a thing in this world? Matrix Master Shun ignored his injury and stared at Su Li's face. He tried to recall, but the girl in front of him could not be matched with any Matrix Master he knew. You are from Zhenlo Group. Su Li did not answer. She glanced at the unique embroidery of Zhenlo Group on the sleeves of the old man, a high-grade Matrix Master. No wonder. Even if Su Guohong is senile, his realm of Matrix Circle will not degenerate so much. Matrix Master Shin blushed and couldn't speak. At the same time, he wondered why Su Li was so familiar with Zhenlo Group. Why didn't Zhenlo Group know anything about this woman? He was not worried about his own life. He had done his best to help Su Yuanhai. Even if he quit now, Su Yuanhai would not blame him. With the support of Zhenlo Group, the Grand Elder of an Eye sect in front of him would not kill him unless he was out of his mind. I didn't expect that I, Su Yuanhai, a wise man, would be defeated by a half-grown child. Or, Su Yuanhai's low voice sounded, followed by the sound of stones rolling down. Your Excellency, in order to survive, you possess a child. It is against the harmony of heaven and earth. Su Li turned around and saw Su Yuanhai standing up with his hand on his chest. His mouth was bleeding, and he looked at her gloomily. After a moment of silence, she suddenly chuckled. If I were you, I wouldn't choose to use the thing in my hand. From the beginning to the end, you have been plotting against our Eye sect. There is a saying that you reap what you sow. Do you understand, family head Su? Su Yuanhai's movement under his sleeves paused for a moment, and he didn't dare to act rashly. At this moment, he could feel the boundless pressure coming from his opponent. His intuition told him that if he took the risk, there was a 99% chance that he would fail. The woman in front of him gave him too much pressure. His aura was as obscure as the sea and extremely dangerous, as if he only needed to make a move to take his life in an instant. He's definitely not at the peak of the nascent soul stage. Even if he's not yet a soul formation cultivator, he's not far from it. Thinking of this, Su Yuanhai let out a long sigh and relaxed his body. But he sneered mercilessly, your cultivation is obviously much higher than ours. Even if you don't do anything, you can crush us with your strength alone. Why do you have to resort to such a despicable trick and make us laugh at you? Despicable? Su Li shook her head and couldn't help laughing. The gentle arc on her face suddenly became cold and stern. Stupid guy. Don't use these bullshit morals to suppress me. Since there's a shortcut I can take, why must I give up on what's close at hand and seek what's far away? It's simply a waste of my time to fight with you mobs for 300 rounds. Su Yuanhai's expression changed slightly, and he took a deep breath, unscrupulous and unconventional. You are a member of the diabolism. As soon as this remark came out, all the lords who were still lying on the ground and healing silently raised their heads, with deep meaning in their eyes. Everyone has the right to kill the evildoer of the diabolism. What a big hat. I can't afford to bear it. Suli raised her eyebrows and said, My and I sect has been living in a humble place for development, but your Su family insisted on coming to us and said that I am a member of the diabolism. Do you believe it yourself, Su Yuanhai? Su Yuanhai couldn't say anything when he heard it, because what Suli said was the truth. At this moment, he even faintly resented Su Zini in his heart. Huajian sect didn't show its strength and didn't show any threat. It was clearly a hidden sect that wanted to avoid the world. But Su Zini didn't go to the outside world to practice and improve her cultivation. Instead, she poked a hornet's nest. Now she not only died, but also implicated the whole 7th branch of Su family and its affiliated sections. Su Yuanhai got a headache as he thought about it. Seeing the intimidating look in Su Li's eyes getting more and more intense, his pressure increased greatly. Finally, he couldn't help but bow his head and sigh. This time, my Su family admits defeat. There was no other way. The situation was beyond his control. He couldn't die for the 7th branch of Su family, even though his cultivation was supplied by Su family. People were selfish. Su Li curled her lips slightly and turned her eyes to the lords of small forces. She said in a cold tone, You all heard it. I have something to discuss with the head of Su family. Irrelevant people, get out of here. I will count to 3. If anyone doesn't want to leave, then stay here forever. 1. After Su Li finished the first order, the lords who were lying on the ground moaning got up one by one and fled out of the valley. They ran faster than usual. Even Matrix Master Shun, who was embedded in the stone wall, broke free, smiled at Su Yuanhai, and ran out of the valley. Su Yuanhai's eyes widened. He felt suffocated in his heart and almost vomited blood. A group of useless good-for-nothings only knew how to escape. If they didn't escape, he might have a chance to turn the situation around. Before Su Li finished the second count, all the people in Cangjin Valley had left. Qing Weiyue also retreated to the entrance of the valley with all the seriously injured elders of Su family, keeping a lookout for Su Li. Seeing Qing Weiyue's action, Su Yuanhai reacted at this time and blurted out, You have already subdued Meng's sect. It seems that you are not too stupid. Su Li's indifferent words made Su Yuanhai speechless. Finally, he sighed deeply. I didn't lose unjustly. Not only the strength. The possessor in front of him was far above him in both scheming and scheming. How could he defeat such a person? Su Yuanhai felt a strong sense of powerlessness in his heart. It was impossible. That's all. Next, let's talk about the compensation. Su Li touched the storage ring, and 2 soft seats and a stone table appeared on the ground. There was also a cup of tea on the table, with hot smoke curling up. She sat down slowly, holding her chin, and looked at Su Yuanhai. Your Su family deceived me to come out of practice and wasted so much time. Have you thought about how to appease my anger? Su Yuanhai's face darkened, and he wanted to curse in his heart. I am the one who suffered the most loss. She even wanted compensation? But looking at Su Li's aggressive posture, how could he dare not to compensate? Su Mengqing and others were still in the hands of Qing Weiyue. If he said no, the Grand Elder of an I sect would directly order to kill them, and then he would really be finished. Compensation? What kind of compensation do you want? As long as you don't pursue this matter, I will promise you all. Su Yuanhai gritted his teeth and said. His heart was bleeding. But at this moment, he still didn't understand what Su Li really meant by compensation. You are very good and know what to do. Su Li slowly picked up the teacup and took a sip. In this case, I won't let you suffer losses. How about making a deal with you? Su Yuanhai suddenly became nervous. Su Li didn't mention the specific compensation, which made him feel a little bad. What deal? It's very simple. Su Li smiled and showed her white teeth. Under the sunlight, they looked a little gloomy in Su Yuanhai's eyes. I won't touch anything of the Su family. But the premise is that the senior members of the 7th branch of the Su family must follow my orders. As soon as Su Li said this, Su Yuanhai immediately stood up from the soft seat with his eyes wide open. That's impossible. Su Li raised her eyebrows. You, Su Yuanhai, just act according to Su Zhao's eyes. Why can't you change your master now? Su Yuanhai sneered. You don't have the slightest concept of blood relationship. How can you say that you are not an evil practitioner? I, Su Yuanhai, will not be so depraved if I acknowledge an evil practitioner as my master. The gentleness on Su Li's face gradually disappeared, and her tone became colder. Surrender or die. You choose one. Then I'd rather die. Su Yuanhai laughed. People like you will never understand the fetters of the family and the affection of the family. You want me to betray the Su family? Forget it. Su Li was silent. She didn't understand? Your father died early, and your mother married another man. You have been alone since you were a child. How can a person like you understand the affection of the family? Your so-called kinship? Don't tell me you're talking about your younger sister. When you were young, Su Li's calm tone sounded quietly. The indignation on Su Yuanhai's face, which was full of passion a second ago, seemed to be frozen by time and completely stiffened. Then, it slowly turned into panic and horror. How do you know? I have my own way. Su Li laughed wantonly and looked at Su Yuanhai with cold eyes. Do you want me to continue? How dare you? Shut up. Su Yuanhai looked ferocious. He knelt down in front of Su Li and grabbed his scalp, shouting, What do you know? I don't want to, but I can't stop it at all. I am too weak. So, I want to be stronger. Stronger. Do you know how sad I am every time she is caught to bleed? You have no idea. Looking at Su Yuanhai's madness, Su Li caught the meaning of his words, and her eyes gradually became strange. Bleed? She was bled when she was a child? Why didn't she remember it at all? Hey, little Su Li, there is something wrong with this guy. Tut. He even begins to hurt himself. It seems that he has a deep mental barrier. Black Lotus appeared and seemed to be watching the fun. Su Li frowned tightly. Seeing that Su Yuanhai was about to bite off his hands, she finally knocked him out with a palm. Her expression was a little uncertain. She had too many puzzles to solve. Who could solve them for her? Su Xiao. He was the strongest practitioner in Su family and one of the 6 Huashan realms in the entire Jiuzhou region. If she wanted to get the information from him, she must appear as the winner above him. In the final analysis, I am still too weak. If I have the cultivation of Huashan realm now, it is enough to sweep across the Jiuzhou region. It will not be so difficult to know the layout of those mighty figures on me. Su Li thought in her mind. She picked up the fainted Su Yuanhai and was about to go out. Suddenly, Black Lotus's surprised and uncertain voice sounded. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.